It is 1 p.m.
You saw Brian's going to be here in a few minutes. He's on his way.
We got some folks running up the steps, and we've got a couple who are going to be watching the live stream from their districts. As I'm sure everyone in the room is aware, we just finished a special session here at the Capitol, and all of those senators and House members have to get back to their district and make up for all the missed constituent meetings and issues that built up while we were up here doing the people's work during the special session. Now, I'll ask Chairman Albers if he would do me the favor of offering up a prayer before we get started.
Number 6. Be my pleasure. Please bow your heads. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity to work together, to serve people, to help people, to do what you called us to do, which is lay down the things around us, all God's children working together to benefit one another. Lord, we just ask you bless these meetings and the work ahead. In your most holy name we pray. Amen.
I want to remind everybody something I said when we first started this at the first meeting. We're here to look at the Fulton County Jail. And that's very clear. We're here to look at the Fulton County Jail. I didn't say we're here to look at the sheriff's office. We're here to look at the county commission. We're here to look at the district attorney's office or the judiciary. Those are 4 very important pillars that impact the Fulton County Jail that is owned by the citizens of Fulton County. I will not allow myself or this committee to be distracted by anyone's personal goals, anyone's personal politics. I have been raised throughout my adult life as a law enforcement officer, and I appreciate the integrity of an investigation. And an investigation means that you do not get distracted, you do not get in a hurry, you take your time, you be patient, and you thoroughly vet all the information. We started this subcommittee last month with a meeting to come in and educate individuals on what a jail is. And I will tell you, I've done research nationwide, and I can fill this room with books written about prisons. I can't fill this desk with books written about jails, because not only do the citizens of Fulton County, the citizens of Georgia not understand what a jail is, but most people in the United States of America do not understand exactly what a jail is and what goes into a jail, what comes out of a jail, and what happens inside of a jail. And so that's what we're here to do. And the people that impact a jail are the people I mentioned before: your county commission, your sheriff's office, your prosecuting office, and your judiciary. And so our main focus moving forward at this meeting is going to be jail overcrowding, who's in jail. I want to thank the sheriff and his team. From the very beginning of this, they've been very responsive, and they realized, or they realized early on that when Chairman Albers asked me to chair this and dive into this deep, dark water of a county jail, that we're just doing this to bring all the information out so that the individuals who pay for this jail, and please do not be confused, there are tax dollars outside of Fulton County that go into the operations of those 4 entities that I just talked about. So when someone says, why does State Senator Randy Robertson care about the Fulton County Jail? I'll tell you what I told the Georgia Sheriff's Association. I care about all 159 county jails because every one of them house citizens that live here in Georgia. And not everybody in jails had an opportunity to have their day in court. And victims' rights matter, and how an individual accused of a crime is treated impacts the victims also. So this is very important to everybody. And with that, does any other committee member wish to say anything? Chairman Albers.
Thank you, Chairman Robertson. I appreciate your approach. I want to be really clear on something. This is not political. And if you are making it political, I'm going to say this one time, stop. It's embarrassing by some people's behavior right now. It's embarrassing by the way some of the media is portraying this right now. We're talking about people's lives. Deflecting to something else in order to take the eye off the problem is always the wrong answer. By now, after almost 14 years, you know me well. I lock arms and work with anybody, as does the people on this committee. So start acting responsible as we all work together to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. All right, Sheriff, I welcome you back, and you and your team, and glad you were able to be here this morning. And when we talked last time, your team just got into the good flow of it, and we had to end because of time. I'd like to pick up on there and look at right now how many properties you're responsible for that house detainees, what these detainees look like, the issues related to these detainees, the unique bookings that you may run into. I know a lot of people believe that, what they see on TV is what's seen. They don't see all the unique individuals that come through the back door that require unique treatment beyond what you do. I was speaking to somebody today, and when I told them, they were talking about the jail, and they said, what's something that would shock me about a county jail? And I talked about the number of meals y'all had to serve in a day, and they were blown away by that. And I told them, go find a hotel or a restaurant in the city of Atlanta, Los Angeles, New York, or anybody else that serves that many meals a day, and I'd be happy to take them out to dinner, and they knew they wouldn't be able to do that. So what I'm going to do, Sheriff, is I'm going to hand it off to you. Any questions that may come up between Senator Halpern, Chairman Albers, and myself, we'll ask you to stop, and we'll ask the questions as we move through. Okay.
Absolutely perfect. First, if I may take an opportunity to say thank you both for your leadership and take an opportunity to come over to the facility. I want to apologize to Senator Halpern. My travel schedule and has prevented us from getting together, so I look forward to personally, I want to make sure you or any other colleagues that you have that want to come over and we've had long conversations about the sheriff's office and things that we can do, much like Senator Albers and a chairman, in terms of improving and protecting our community. So I appreciate each of you for that, and those that are joining us via or virtually, certainly appreciate that as well. So again, let me start here. I am certainly happy to be here in terms of being able to provide and having meaningful conversation around what we have experienced for the last 2.5 going on 3 years since I was sworn in as the 28th Sheriff of Fulton County. I am both humbled and honored to be the sheriff. As the chair has alluded to, he is born and raised in law enforcement, and he is absolutely on point, having been in the Georgia Sheriff's conferences where you have graced us to really continue to support what we do around the great state of Georgia. So that being said, it is important, and we have a slideshow or a slide deck prepared for you that really shines a light on a couple things. One, the aging infrastructure of what we've been dealing with over the last decade plus, as well as the understanding that we actually have more violent inmates that are being arrested. And this is nothing new to each of you and what the state is going through as well. And then the conversation around detainees that are more medically sick, as well as the conversation around mental health and what that looks like. So if you look at the first slide here, and we certainly will provide hard copies for you at the end so that you will have that. We operate several jails throughout in Fulton County. The main jail itself, the current population, and I must say this point in time study was December 7th. We want to make sure we could be as accurate as we could with all of the information, and to try and push it to one more day or the day before this would really it would skew the numbers, so we want to make sure we had a solid set of data that we could present to you. Currently at our main jail are 1,838 individuals. The Marietta Annex, which we discussed yesterday, we are going to restart our K-9 cellmate program. now that our numbers are down, and we'll look at why the numbers are down as we continue to go through that piece. But we house the nomenclature is trustees, those that help run the facility under the watchful eye of our detention officers and deputies. The lease at the Atlanta City Detention Center, that number has risen, but on December 7th, we had 399 individuals there. The Alpharetta Annex, which we opened in support of those law enforcement agencies in North County to try and make sure that they didn't have to spend hours on the road transporting detainees back and forth there. South Annex, which is similar, we reopened after we shuttered it when we went to the Atlanta City Detention Center, simply because we moved all of our female detainees to the Atlanta City Detention Center, the need for more space and the need for more opportunities to isolate bad actors. So we've had, as many of us have discussed, we've had detainees attack each other, have detainees attack some of our staff members, and what that looks like from that perspective. And then out of county, we still utilize Oconee County, we utilize Fayetteville, Rockdale, any of our sheriffs. As you know, I have reached out to all 159 sheriffs through the Georgia Sheriff's Association to say if you have 1 bed space, 10 bed spaces, we need them. We need to share that opportunity. Here's an important note before we leave this page, and that is ultimately 2.5 years ago, we started out with 3,600 detainees. So we're down now, and we'll go through how we arrived there, to 2,819 on December 7th. But it's important to note, and Senator and Chairman mentioned this earlier, as the chief law enforcement officer, as the sheriff's office, as the largest sheriff's office in Georgia, that means there's a potential for 3,600 victims. And so we keep that in mind as we continue to go forward from that perspective.
Sheriff, if I could ask you a quick question. The 320 that are out of county, is Fulton County paying to have those?
In some instances, yes. So Oconee County, for instance, we take all of our probation and parolees down there, and it fluctuates. So then there's Cobb County as well. And so we have 280 people there. And we'll go through some of the numbers as of this date. But yes, we are paying out of the outsourced budget to house individuals.
Okay.
And it fluctuates based on the number.
And I heard you say, and these are VOP, primarily VOP, violation of probation?
Only in Oconee County.
Okay.
And so the rest of them, Cobb County, for instance, is a good example where we can take individuals, drop them off, and they house them just as they house their individuals. So we pay them $80 a day, but we pay the city of Atlanta $50 a day per person, because ultimately all we need is bed space there, and we're providing the staff at the Atlanta City Detention Center.
Are the majority of these VOP inmates or detainees, is there probation with the state?
So yes, and so we'll get to those specific numbers later on, and the state has been doing a really great job of helping us wade through that.
Right.
And specifically those individuals that are going to the state that have been sentenced.
Yeah.
We've created a great relationship with Commissioner Oliver and his team, and so we have a cadence that allows us to get people out.
At times, people will come up and ask, and I know Chairman Albers has had it, where they'll ask if we have state inmates in county jails. And I want to be clear that there's a difference between a jail detainee and a state inmate, but that if the inmate, which is a sentenced individual who is out in the community, if they violate that probation and they go to the county jail, that the state has a responsibility to the sheriff's office that's detaining that individual, holding that individual, if you will, for them, and that there in the past has been compensation where the taxpayers of Georgia will pay to house them in the county jail. And so I just want to make sure that that the state's upholding its end of the bargain, and I know we'll get to that further, but I do want to make the designation that, like you said, Oconee primarily is the VOP.
So that's the agreement we have with them. And let me help make a further clarification from there. So once an individual is sentenced, if they're sentenced to 12 months or less, they can actually serve their time with us. In many instances, they help run the facility depend on what their charge is from that perspective.
And to be clear, when you say help run the facility, they're considered a trustee?
Correct.
And they're determined that through a classification system that looks at their criminal history, all the other things involved, to make sure that we're putting good actors into those trustee roles, because they're given a little more free rein to do their job, whether it's in the laundry, the kitchen, or wherever it may be for jail operations,
Perfect.
correct?
So to your point, they're classified if they can leave the actual proximity of the jail, what that looks like. Can they go to another facility and help from that perspective, clean up, whatever that looks like, yard work, to your point, laundry, et
Right.
cetera.
Where do they sleep?
So right now, most of them are in the Marietta Annex, right, because that is the trustee form where we
Right.
keep our trustees there. And again, as Colonel Clark and I discussed yesterday, and let me start over. Forgive me. I know you're familiar with these two because they were here. So to my left is Chief Johnson, who I pulled out of retirement. Right, he was a marshal for many years at Fulton County, and then served as up to major at the Fulton County Sheriff's Office as well, and our longest tenured commander, and as he will tell you, interim chief jailer, right? Although he's doing a fantastic job, but he will make sure you understand that interim is interim. But Colonel Clark has really taken this bull by the horn, for lack of a better word, and really done some magnificent things that we continue to move forward. So,
Well, I
please
appreciate
forgive
that.
me.
I just wanted
Please
to clarify that to see what classification of detainee you were sending out of county, because I know there does come an expense if we're moving pretrial people outside of county, then having to transport them back in. And I do notice that Chief Clark's hair is getting whiter and whiter every time I see him.
I told him that the other day.
Yeah.
I told him that the other day. So let me provide
Yeah.
some clarity. So, for instance, Cobb County, it doesn't matter the classification of detainees. They house them for us. We don't have to staff Cobb County. Oconee County, we don't have to staff, but they prefer probation and parole. City of Atlanta, we do staff, and so it doesn't matter who we send because we're providing the staff. Forsyth County, doesn't matter. Sheriff Freeman over there is doing a really good job of helping us manage our population as well. The South Annex, we staff, so again, doesn't matter from that perspective. And then, of course, the Marietta Annex, we will use that in terms of additional staffing beyond individuals that have been arrested in the north end of the county and don't have to come back down. So right now, those are our main hubs. We will do one-offs with Rockdale, Coweta, or Henry County, where we have relationships where, and a law enforcement official may have been arrested, and so they may have the availability to house that individual and what that looks like. So they're one-offs from there. So ultimately, that's kind of the outsourcing piece there. And then the county has, working with the Board of Commissioners, they have a subset of funds specifically for outsourcing.
Okay, thank you.
Our next slide, one of the things that is certainly, and this is really easy, male versus female, and you can see the majority of our individuals are males. One of the things that we've discussed is really our population breakdown by race, and so if you look at really the telling sign is the Black or African American race that has literally 90% of our customers, those that we provide care for, are Black or African American, and of course if there are any totals there, but that's 90.5% of the individuals that we serve. The next slide talks about the breakdown by age. We talk about a more violent detainee, but we also talk about a younger detainee and ultimately what that looks like. In many instances, whether you see it on TV or otherwise, it has become, shamingly so, a badge of honor to take, matter of fact, they term it vacation, right? I'm going on vacation for a year or so and what that looks like. And then many people, again, and I've said this publicly and privately, is that we have a number of gangs internal to our jail. Those gangs have now become subdivided, and so where you have a Blood or a Crip, we have now internally to the facility, we have a Blood that's in 100 or 200, and they have band together to make sure that they are either stronger by nature or at least they act as one from that perspective. The next breakdown is misdemeanors. myth that we have a jail full of misdemeanors. We wanted to make sure we continue to have a conversation around what that looks like. So one thing we did, and we'll talk about it later, but it's worth noting now, and that is we started an inmate advocacy unit. And that unit is specifically charged with going through each one of the cases in rotation to determine, one, if we have better resources to get them to court. If they're misdemeanors, we partner with the DA as well as our Solicitor General, as well as a public defender's office and the courts to see if, in many instances, we've had this conversation, some individuals had been in jail longer than they would have had they gone to court, been sentenced, and their sentence was probably longer from that perspective. So this was an opportunity for us to get ahead of the conversation because, and I've heard the chairman say, as sheriff's offices, we are stuck in the middle of this rotation. And so ultimately, when you look at this, and we'll go through this pretty quickly, the misdemeanor only cases, meaning that's they simply have a misdemeanor charge, 103. The other thing that's important to note, that 151 was December 7th, and as of today it's down to 142. And the other thing that we do is we're very intentional about taking, especially as we come up on Christmas, we will determine, okay, what this person's charges are. But equally as important to note is of this 151 at the time, 142 today, more than half of those are attached to a domestic violence case. And so we don't have the autonomy to lean in as much as we do because the judges have to then make decisions around that. You'll see, again, the trustees are made up of the 14 plus weekenders. So in many instances, the judge will say, I want you to continue to go to work. I don't want to break that cycle. Don't want you to lose your job. So Friday at 6 o'clock, you got to turn yourself in. So we have 3 individuals there. The competency, which we will continue to talk about, is that space or that person that has to have some mental health comparisons or mental health services that ultimately we as those that would provide care and custody, we have to focus on making sure we have those as well. And that's the last category, this misdemeanor with a hold. It is up from 13 to 29 today. So ultimately that means that they may be charged with a misdemeanor inside Fulton County, but they have a hold for Cobb County or a hold for Coweta County. In many instances, we will work with the Solicitor General and his team and forego that charge and send them to the more serious charge that they may be being held for out of county.
Sheriff,
Yes.
when you say forego the charge, you mean a null pros?
Correct.
Okay.
And we'll let the courts decide that.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So what victims' cases aren't necessarily being dismissed, but they're making the choice as to which case is heavier, more important, and they may
Correct.
do a dead docket or
Correct.
a null pros, and then let the other county that has a hold on them come and pick them up, take them there, and adjudicate that case there, right?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to be clear, and that's a decision made within the courts. That's not a decision made by the sheriff's office.
It's a decision made within the courts.
The Solicitor General's office or the
Correct.
District Attorney's office, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Now, the important factor, though, with our inmate advocacy unit, there are certain people that have been charged with juvenile crimes, for instance, or wanted for whatever the reason. We will now take it a step further to see why they're wanted. And so we've had instances where a gentleman was wanted out of Florida for a crime he committed when he was a juvenile that Florida said they weren't coming to get.
Right.
And so why hold him in jail specifically for that? Let's see what we can do to get him released.
And I want to be clear, I don't want to mix my apples and oranges. The null pros or the dead docket has to come out of the Solicitor General's office or the DA's office. It cannot
Correct.
come out of the court. They make the recommendation
Correct.
to the court. Right. Okay.
Correct.
So I don't want somebody in a black robe to run in here and say I accused them of something they're not guilty of.
No.
So,
They,
yeah.
and between Chief Judge Glanville and certainly our state court Judge Taylor, as well as our probate judge Kenya Johnson and our magistrate Judge Kurt, we have a great relationship. We've worked really hard on building those relationships so that we can, the ebb and flow of what it looks like to get people sometimes in jail if there's a warrant, and sometimes out of jail has been.
Well, something I
very
want to thank you
sustainable.
for on these numbers right here. We get a lot of pushback here inside this building where they say our jails and prisons are full of misdemeanors. and that is not the case. But there are misdemeanors in there, but when we're talking about a domestic violence, a lot of people don't understand that a simple battery, i.e. a violent crime, can be a misdemeanor in some cases. And so I think when we break it down and look at it, that the misdemeanors that are held in our county jails only for a misdemeanor are usually those types of cases where there's some type of violence, especially a male against a female or against children and things of that nature. And so it's not just Joe Smith walking down the street. It's not Otis, the town drunk, being held in mass in our county jails.
Correct.
Thank you, Sheriff.
And another thing that's important to note is not only do the domestic violence or family violence cases get intertwined in the misdemeanor count as well. The other piece to that is that we're laser focused on trying to help people we can, but you'd be surprised at the number of people, and I certainly don't speak for Solicitor Gamage, but he and I have had robust conversations around the fact that we have gone to some of these misdemeanors and said, okay, here's the offer, and people just rather stay in jail. Right? Because they may not be sheltered. They may not have the opportunity, but they know they're going to get fed. They know that they are there for whatever the time is. The court said they'll be there, but they don't have to worry about housing or any of the things that come along with that. And there have been a number of people that have just turned down whatever the offer is to help them receive services. All right, so on the next page, we talk about...
Do you think that's because of your 5-star rating? You think
I do.
that's something to do with it?
Believe it or not, it's gotten better.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so, and to that point, right, listen, never miss a moment. One of the things that is important to note, because of the Inmate Advocacy Unit, because of our partnerships with Madam DA, the Solicitor General, the Public Defender's Office, as well as the courts, is we started out, remember I mentioned we started out with 3,600 detainees. 600 of those were sleeping on the floor. On boats. Earlier this week, thanks to Colonel Clark, his team, and specifically Captain Sadiq, who you may have met when we had an opportunity. You certainly will meet Senator Halpern. Literally, we have no one sleeping on the floor.
And Sheriff, I want to be clear. We brought this up the last time, and your counsel was really good at it. When we say sleeping on the floor, we are not talking about sleeping on concrete. We're talking about sleeping on what we call a boat,
Correct.
Which is I guess about a 6 to 8 inch plastic riser that sits on the floor, that are stackable, easy to store, and basically it's a cot, if you will.
Correct.
I lived in a blueberry patch during Katrina, so it was similar to what we used out there.
Right.
But you're on that. You have a mattress, you have a blanket, you have a pillow in most cases, and so it's not laying on concrete, curled up in the fetal position.
Correct.
Right.
And so to that extent, we have no one sleeping on the floor.
Very good.
And we do have 10 people in the medical or the MOU, medical observation unit, that are on those devices simply because they cannot ambulate to get up and down. And so it is through the medical unit's advice or their professional experience that it's best we may have an amputee, for instance, or someone that are on those devices, and that is 10 last time we talked this morning. So.
Okay, Chairman
Sheriff,
Howard.
yeah, if I could, I just want to take a moment to recognize an extraordinary feat. The fact that you've got the population down means that people are working together as we want them to, which means the justice system is flowing in a way that is allowing you to reduce the number of people that you have to house in those jails, and that is something worth celebrating. All too often these days, all we talk about is bad news. This is good news. Let's make sure we report on it accordingly.
Amen.
Thank you.
We certainly appreciate that recognition. The team has worked really, day and night to make sure that we can achieve these numbers with the understanding that humanity we wanted to put first so we could get people off of these floor devices. So we certainly appreciate the recognition. We appreciate that. The jail population breakdown, it is certainly a daunting task when you look at the people we service. When you have 421 people charged with murder, I remind people when you come to Fulton County, we have the individual, we have the spot shooter, we have the Midtown shooter, we have the young lady that tried to set MLK's home on fire. All right, so if it happens bad in Fulton County, we have those individuals. It's important to note of the 549 aggravated assaults, these are not one and the same. So, for instance, the 421 individuals charged with murder could also be charged with aggravated assault. But these aggravated assaults are part separate from the actual charge themselves. But you see they range from stalking to aggravated sodomy. We house the worst of the worst.
And Sheriff, for all of our CSI fans who may be watching on live stream, aggravated assault is attempted murder.
It is.
Is that right?
It is.
Okay,
And that's a very good point. Very good point. So this is, again, it really speaks volume to where we are within society as a whole. But ultimately, I remind people when we have incidences inside the Fulton County Jail, whether it be a stabbing or attempted, to your point, attempted murder, is that these people didn't get arrested because they were singing too loud in the choir. They got arrested because someone was harmed, hurt or harmed, and our goal is to protect those that we can as well. So, any questions around the charges, Chairman?
You haven't heard me sing in the choir. I could be in there.
I know better than that one. Here's an important note for us. The unindicted cases have dropped to 181. The individuals, 781. Wishful thinking, right? so as my mom would say, a Freudian slip. So we'll get to 181 here, hopefully. But right now, where we are is at 781. Those individuals with the 593.
Sheriff, I'm going to stop you real quick on
Yes.
this. Again, I hate to keep bugging you, but these are questions that come to us.
No worries.
Your overall population is what?
2,819.
Okay, do we have a percentage on that? Is that about 33%? Or am I a little? 781 of the overall? Is it a little bit less than? Okay, thank you.
I promise you, somebody behind me working on the exact percentage for
yeah.
you. But it's important to note that of that 593 without holes have been there less than 90 days at this point. There are a few outliers that have been there 100, 150 days and what that looks like. So we are focused on really, again, telling the story so that we can get access and allow the inmate advocacy unit to help push that conversation as well.
I have a question. So, as I understand it, the way that unindicted is counted, I could be held for 5 charges. 2 of them might be unindicted, but 3 of them might have been I might have actually had indictments on 3 of my 5 charges. So there's 2 sitting out there that look unindicted. And the question that I have is, how do you parse out the people who have unindicted charges but are charged with other things to just people who are sitting there with no charges, with no indictments at all against any of their charges? Does that make sense?
And so most of those will have a secondary hold on them. And so we'll leave that up to the DA's office to muddle through that particular point of it.
But on this 781, are there people in this number who in fact have been indicted on other charges?
There are many of them that have been indicted on
On other
charges.
Okay,
Okay.
and I know Pete Scandalakis is here with PAC, and he's going to come up and present to us afterwards. But and maybe he'll clarify this. If you're indicted on cases and unindicted on cases, I'm wondering, is vast majority of the time this is separate cases though, correct? So where the individual came in, were indicted on particular, because if you have somebody brought in on 5 companion charges and all of them felonies, then when you would go to the grand jury, you would present evidence on those 5 charges. Right. And so you would either return true bills or no bills on those 5. Rarely would they parse out 3, send you back with a true bill on 2, and then 3 laying there unindicted.
Correct.
So these are probably individuals with multiple cases that aren't necessarily connected.
Perfectly described. Perfectly described. And then,
What number are you on? 5?
How has that number changed over time? Do you have any recent history on whether that number's drastically lower or consistent?
I can only tell you when I took office, that number was north of 3,000, closer to 4,000 people.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I specifically confirmed that this morning. And so it is, to Senator Albert's point, we are working together. to bring that number down, and so that has been very helpful to us. Your point about true billing, we will get the true bill back, and so ultimately that individual, if 2 of those cases were parceled out, then we'd only still have the 3. And then the other piece, I do want to give you that total is 27.7%. So I want to make sure, right, absolutely very, very close. So, all right. The next slide, when we break down, one of the questions that we get often is how long people have been there. And so we wanted to know how many people were there longer than 3 years. We did take an opportunity to discuss as we took the tour. At the time, we had 3 people that had been there longer than 10 years. Now, those people were charged with murder, and those people were charged with...
Sheriff, real quick, I want you to say that again, if you can.
We did at the time. We had 3 people that had been in jail for 10 years, right, approaching 11 in some instances. All 3 charged with murder. I will tell you, 2 of them were charged with murdering a police officer.
Right.
And so ultimately, one of the things that we talk about when we talk about mental health around the state as we've had these conversations, the mental health opportunities of the hospitals have diminished, where we can send people. And so ultimately, those individuals, what happens in the state competency cases, the individual goes, they raise the level of competency, and the individual comes back. Now they have to get on the court calendar within 30, 31 days. If not, they have to go back through the restoration program from that perspective.
So where do y'all typically send detainees for the competency?
So we
Is
have
it West Georgia?
So we have Milledgeville, we have Georgia Regional, and ultimately we have our own competency restoration program that we partner with different hospitals with. The last person, I personally talked to his parents, and we sent an individual to Georgia Regional. He had 7 people in front of him before.
Okay, and where's Georgia Regional? Is that in?
Right, Panthersville.
Okay, so while they're at Georgia Regional, they're still considered a detainee in the Fulton County Jail, correct?
Correct.
So they still come up on your head count. It just shows them as being on loan
Correct.
to the
Correct.
facility. And the purpose of that is to get them competent to stand trial or to get an adjudication back that they will never be competent enough
Correct.
to stand trial.
Correct.
And then the court will take action and have them placed wherever they need to be, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware of a statute in Georgia that sets a time limit on how long someone could be in a competency rehabilitation type facility?
I am not, and our stats prove that out. So if you look at the 150 people that have been there 3 years or longer, 38 of them have been in this competency restoration piece. And so we have as many as 50 or 60 that are currently there in less than 3 years that are still trying to go through this competency restoration program.
So where are the 3 that were in there for 10 years or more?
So one case was adjudicated. The other 2, they're going through the program, and they're caught in the ebb and flow of court.
Okay, I think caught is a good word.
Yeah. And one of them was sentenced here recently.
Okay, so one's been adjudicated. Was that person determined to be
Guilty. Yes.
And so now they are part of the state prison
Correct.
system?
Yes,
And
sir.
the other 2 still are part of Fulton County Jail, and they are going through the process,
Correct.
if you will. The 2 that are going through the process have been there 10 years?
9, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think they've been particularly close.
Close?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know one is close to 9, but
Okay.
ultimately the one that stood out the most was the 10-year
Okay,
that has been in the court.
and I don't think I'm a lone voice crying in the wilderness where I just find that. I mean, and look, I understand in the sheriff's office and the county jail are the middlemen in this. And in this case, I wouldn't even say that. Because there's attorneys involved in the prosecution of the case and the defense of the case, and there's individuals involved on the judiciary side. And somebody brought it up before about somebody being in that long, and they said, well, Senator, they were charged with murder. Well, look, I dealt with a group of individuals who murdered the Alday family down in South Georgia, and an individual who murdered a serial killer in Columbus that killed several elderly females. And 10 years is just beyond my imagination.
It is.
And so, you know, and it being only 2 is, I mean, 2's better than 20, but 2 is too many. And I think that I'm glad y'all brought this up. There's an opportunity for us to look and see where we can look at some of these competency type things, because I know in the state of Maryland, I believe, their competency requirement, it may be 5 years, that you either have to get them competent enough or they have to be assigned to a facility and you move on.
Correct.
But thank you for that,
And
Sheriff.
we will, if you will allow us, we'll get
Oh,
you the
please.
specifics on those too.
Yes, sir.
And that may be a little more helpful as we go on.
Yeah, Chairman Strickland is a master at figuring out how we can move obstacles out of the way in the judiciary system to try to get things done, and so I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I'd like to make a note that our slides aren't displaying properly, and so the BO in the bottom left
80.
is actually 80.
Yeah, I was lost.
Yeah, and so, and several of the other slides aren't displaying properly. So we'll make the corrections as we move forward. We'll make note of those issues and let you know what the proper information
Okay.
is.
We'll get you a hard copy.
And is there a breakdown of how many are 3 years, how many are 5 years, how many are,
We can do that. We just
Yeah.
started at 3 years or greater,
right?
and so we can certainly get that for you
Thank
as
you.
well. All right. Speaking of breakdowns, time in custody, which is a big issue for us, so a big opportunity, I won't say issue, big opportunity for us to get right. So one of the things that we focused on was the the American Correctional Association's definition of what average daily population is versus length of stay. And so I know this came up last time during the Senate hearing, and so we want to bring some clarity. This point in time study on December 7th showed that we had all the individuals, we had 2,819 individuals that represented over 800,000 days in jail. You do the average, that means that individual, on average, on that day, it was 294 days that they had spent in the facility. When you talk about the length of stay, and that says average turnover rate, and it's probably better described as length of stay, that takes into admissions, releases, et cetera. The one thing that has been helpful for us is the Board of Commissioners did approve a 15-month, $1.5 million jail feasibility study, and that jail feasibility study showed, on average, when you take into account admissions and releases, 59 to 60 days as a turnover rate.
This average, is this equating the 150 in there also?
This 150, yes. So it does take into
So there, it is going to be skewed somewhat.
Correct.
By individuals who've been in there for 3 years or longer.
or 10.
Yeah, a 10,
Right,
yeah. Because I read one study, very recent study, that I looked at last week that said the average time in a county jail in the United States is 26 days.
Correct.
And I scratched my head because I think what we're doing is we're taking metro areas and we're pouring in all these rural county jails where 26 days would seem like a lot in a 20, 30 bed county
Correct.
jail, whereas bigger jails, that's not necessarily the case with larger populations. So I think that kind of skews the number a little bit because 294 is a lot.
It is,
Yeah.
and that is that point in time. But again, when you consider admissions and releases, what the standard is, the jail feasibility study came, and again, it ended up being a really good study. Ultimately came out, and that's probably better termed length of stay as opposed to average turnover rate, but it is closer to 59 or 60. And here's a telling slide for us, and pardon the Christmas green and red, but one of the things that is worth noting is that we release less than half the people we take in. We take in twice as many people because, again, right, largest county of the 159 counties, we have 15 municipalities plus colleges and university police within, and so on average, you look at how many people we book in versus how many we book out. What's not up here, which I think is worth at least acknowledging, is the fact in 2022, we took in 19,209 bookings. This year to date, we're already at 20,670, and that represents a growth, if you will, or more than 1,461 individuals. So crime has not stopped.
A quick question for you, Sheriff. Over the years, they were city jails as well. I know, obviously, ADC, which you're using a portion of today. We had a Roswell City Jail in my hometown as well. When those cities shuttered their jails, basically put all that population into your system. Is that not accurate?
So that is very accurate. And I was fortunate to lead the City of Atlanta Detention Center for 10 years, for a decade. Worked there for 31 years. And so as a young rookie, when we came in, everyone arrested in Atlanta came to the city jail first. They had a bond hearing or probable cause hearing through the magistrate court.
There you go.
Keep going. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We're
So-
having some technical difficulties. Keep
Okay.
going.
So let me recap for those that may be online. So again, I started in 1988 in 2010, I was appointed chief of the city jail. Now in '88, anyone that was arrested in the city of Atlanta came directly to the City of Atlanta Detention Center first. They had a probable cause hearing. Those individuals that were then bound over went to the county facility. And we did that on a rotation of every other week. And so that was able to stem the tide of the influx of individuals that came into the county facility. So I was on the city side at the time. Again, in 2010, I was appointed chief. We did that for a decade. We were able to really partner with outside community organizations as well as the judges to see if those individuals in those probable cause cases really needed to go to the county jail. The minute we stopped in around 2003, 2004, we stopped taking, we being the City of Atlanta Detention Center, stopped taking state charges. It immediately impacted and opened the floodgates at the Fulton County facility. And so
And I was the beneficiary of bringing their guys over to us once a week.
So I just want to follow up on that because I think as we look at root causes, how did we get here, right? When there was an Atlanta City Jail, when there was a Roswell City Jail and other areas, well, that now collapses into what you have in your Fulton County Jail from all those areas, and there may have been more. But in that process, you weren't given any more resources, any more buildings, any more anything. You just got the inmates with nothing to coincide with that. And I think that's an important point in history that we're going to have to look back at to how did we get here. That's certainly going to be a factor.
Correct. I absolutely agree. The minute some instances, Roswell, for instance, shuttered their jail, or in our instance at the City of Atlanta Department of Corrections started really diverting individuals to the county facility, it immediately opened the floodgates, as I said, and overcrowding was exacerbated. And so that's something we hope that at a state level we can look at.
And so, Sheriff, at that point, were you only housing city ordinance violators at the Atlanta?
Oh, no.
Detention center?
We housed everybody.
Well,
So, and
okay.
You
I'm
mean-
talking about when the transition occurred.
So when the transition occurred, if you were charged with murder, for instance, you came to the City of Atlanta jail first.
Right.
You had a probable cause hearing, which may be reset 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
You still were housed at the City of Atlanta Detention Center.
Because it was pre-first hearing.
It was probable cause.
Right.
And ultimately, the judge may reset the case, whatever that looks like. There were instances where people would get sentences or take a plea. And so we would house those individuals, depending on the plea and what that looked like.
But not a felony plea.
Well, it just depends on the judge. A lot of times they reduce the charge.
Oh, okay.
And ultimately, we would house that individual. But in terms of, we had as many as 800 to 1,000 individuals there waiting to go to the county.
Right, and then when y'all made the transition where anybody with a state charge had to go to the county, then all felonies would have to go to the county pre-first hearing?
Their immediate arrest, minus DUI and some
Right.
traffic charges, their immediate arrest was to go to the county.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Yes, sir. All right. So jail population by breakdown, this is slide 7. One of the things, and we began talking about this, the court order, the probation detainees we talked about. Again, as we find individuals, and here's an important note, and I want to give kudos to Chief Judge Glanville and his team. We are looking at taking some of these cases that are probationary cases or parole cases that are technical in nature because somebody missed an appointment or because somebody was in the hospital or whatever that looks like, and they end up back in jail because of that, and having a court calendar that just focuses on that. And so kind of moving away from this silo approach of it's my case, it's my judge, it's my defendant, and trying to have at least once a month a probation or parole calendar that says, here are the technical aspects of why this person is in jail, and do they still need to be here? So,
And real quick, Sheriff, when Chairman Albers set this up, it's miraculously within a week, I read about Saturday court all of a sudden. And now you talk about this other thing, which makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. But it seems like up until that point, when he decided to do this, it seems like some people were either unaware of the problem or were very comfortable in the fact that we were just running as things had always been, which you and I started around the same time. I started in 85, and I know you started in 88, where we would go in and we would ask those questions. You and I were those why guys. We'd come in and say, why do we do it this way? And they'd say, because that's the way we always did it. Right. And so we were somewhat disruptive. I believe we probably both were. But once Chairman Albers mentioned this, then I see these new things bubbling up. And so I just want to make sure that, are you comfortable that these things will be long-lasting things that will address these problems so that we don't get up to these numbers like this, especially on POV cases, because the vast majority of them are technical violation cases. On rare exception, well, not on rare exception, but I understand on some exceptions they will be accompanying with a new charge where somebody may go out and commit a crime and they happen to be on probation during that time, and so they'll violate them then, and they'll have the accompanying charge, which, again, that would be one of those separate kind of things where one would be heard and then the other one would be heard. But I just hope you see in these meetings the willingness to keep these things going and not just use them to deflect, if you will.
So let me start here. Let me unpack this piece.
Yeah.
I think both you and I were awfully alike.
Yes, sir.
Right, in as much as not just asking why, but not accepting the fact that we have always done these things and we want to move the needle on that space. To be fair to the court and everybody involved, Saturday court took a lot of planning. We were able to adjudicate 5 cases, but that's 5 cases that we no longer had in our custody, and what that looks like. Is it sustainable? I'm not here to politicize or make sure that other agencies have the resources they need to make that happen. I support that. Kind of the why, for instance, why don't we have night court? Right? Why don't we have night court every single day? And so the judges will probably tell you we don't have enough resources. I don't get into that argument.
Well, and you help us out with that because Chairman Albers and I have had these discussions, and I know the Prosecuting Attorneys Council understands that. There's one group in this state that can make new judges, can create judges in areas where we need them, and that's where we are today. So when we get to the judiciary side and we look at it, and if we see that there's a community, that there's a deficiency there, because I've experienced a night court traveling around the country with fugitives to where I thought, man, that's the coolest thing in the world. I could pull into Nashville, Tennessee at 11 o'clock at night with a fugitive, and I took them to a hearing so that the judge could determine if I had a right to hold them in their jail until I got up the next morning. And so it does make sense, but it does require resources.
It does require resources, and I certainly appreciate that. And let me be fair to Chief Judge Glanville and Judge McBurney, who was the one that came in and said, I'll hear these cases. And so it becomes intentional to say create more judges with the specifics of they need to be night court judges.
That's right.
Right, because a lot of them are elected officials, and that becomes political, and we want to stay out of that piece. We just want the work done. Now, let me also add to that point is we have been extremely innovative, and what I mean is we partner with Solicitor Gamage and his team, as well as PAD, the pre-arrest diversionary team, as well as the public defenders. And we've offered, and in many instances, they've accepted space at the back door so that they can really run through the cases and have an on-call judge if necessary to see, okay, this was unfortunate, this young individual doesn't need to be here, any individual doesn't need to be here, everything's calmed down, it's safe, and let's not have this person spend the night in jail or whatever it looks like. Or there may be pre-arrest diversion options for us to lean toward. So you're absolutely correct, and anything we can do to support that, we want to make sure we're there.
Thank you.
All right. The court order production, here's something we found opportunistic, if you will. When we ran the numbers, there were upwards of 150 to 200 individuals that had been ordered from state facilities to be a witness or ordered to have their additional charges heard, et cetera, but they were in our facility for 2 weeks, a month, 3 weeks, a month, and it continued 3 months on down the line. So we had harking back to 1988, we had a fierce conversation, opportunity for us to realize and approach our judges and simply say, if you're going to hear the case inside 2 weeks, we'll have the individual. Other than that, we won't house them. And we just do a better job of communicating through the bench and through their judicial offices to make sure that we can provide those services. Again, the probation and parole piece, the conversations and the relationship with all of the state agencies has been since I've taken office, has been one that I take pleasure in making sure. So we can pick up the phone, understand, drill down what a parolee or where they are with that, what that conversation looks like. One of the things that Chairman alluded to, and the reason it becomes sustainable, is if we can get that individual out of the facility or in front of a judge prior to them defending themselves in jail and getting another charge, then we want to do that, because there are a number of people that ultimately are affected by that. The individuals awaiting transfer to state custody has continued to drop. So we do a weekly transport based on the state's availability. And so this says 40 individuals that are waiting. We sent 12 this morning. I tried to send all 40, and Commissioner Oliver, again, has the entire state, so I'm sensitive to that as well, and they simply didn't have the space at the time. I'm confident this time next week we'll at least cut. The number today is 28 as of the transport this morning, so I'm confident we'll be able to, minus whatever adjudications take place this week, we'll be able to cut that in half. So again, there are a number of individuals that are waiting for foreign holds, just like we talked about those that have maybe been sentenced that have a hold for Cobb or Gwinnett, et cetera. We, again, take an opportunity to look to see if they're whole and what they are wanted for is we can stamp hold for Fulton County on them and send them to another facility that may not be overcrowded, then we want to be able to do that as well.
Sheriff, I've heard a lot of bad things and good things about Cobb County, but they are considered foreign.
In terms of the foreign, well, that's just a terminology.
Yeah, is it
right?
holds for other counties is
Right.
what we're looking at?
Right.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
You said foreign, I was thinking of international, so, yeah.
No. However, if there are a couple facilities across the pond that
Yeah.
want to accept these detainees, we will gladly send them.
Exactly.
So, and then lastly, this last slide is indicative of what we are. We talk about an aging facility, an aging structure. On November 19th, we had our latest shakedown. We took 250 of our team members. It didn't matter where you were working, whether it was our 6 motor officers or our crime suppression team or our SWAT team, our fugitive team, as well as our jail team, and went and did a shakedown. And what
Sheriff, could you mention 4 o'clock in the morning?
it was 4 o'clock in the morning. We like doing things before the rest of the world wakes up, right? So that, as the Army would say, we do more before 8 o'clock in the morning, but most people do all day. And what it represents is 380 homemade knives, homemade shanks, 8 cell phones, 20 phone chargers, and really the telltale sign here is, and we've had this discussion, is that I'm surprised the building is still standing because of where we are now. I want to give the Board of Commissioners and the county some credit. We have started a Blitz program. That Blitz program allows us to take the resources to completely redo different zones. So we have 78 zones, 7 of them plus 1 floor is completely out of commission. That represents 300 plus 376 beds that are unusable. And so we are trying to rehab them, because the realization is regardless of what the Board of Commissioners do with respect to building a replacement facility, ultimately, we still have to live in this facility and work in this facility. And this in and of itself is a telltale sign of the building aging and being weaponized, and that's important. So I'll stop there if the
Yeah, Sheriff, I'm looking, and when did this operation occur that we're looking at now?
November 19th.
Okay, so this past month.
Correct.
Correct, okay. I'm seeing pieces laying on there that are obviously plumbing pieces that belong in the jail. So basically, once you seize all this property, there has to be an ongoing maintenance of the jail, because sinks and toilets and other things don't work without
Correct.
the pipes.
Correct.
So, which results in more damage
Correct.
to the jail. But something that jumped out at me, you said phones and chargers.
Correct.
How are phones and chargers getting into cell blocks?
So there are any number of ways, and please let me unpack this. And let me start by thanking Commissioner Oliver. While his team did not participate in this shakedown, we've had 2 this year alone, where he's sent specialized units to help, over 200 people to help us.
And when you say, Commissioner, you're talking about he sent insert teams.
Correct.
And that normally shake down state prisons and correctional facilities coming in and using their expertise, which I know you have some individuals with that unique skill set also, and y'all are just partnering up.
Correct.
Okay.
And so we create this force multiplier, even across different counties, Cobb County and Gwinnett and Henry. And so we bounce from jail to jail to take that expertise to see how we can create this force multiplier. Going back to unpacking this piece. So yes, off the top, where we have had bad apples, we've had individuals that have actually been hired to ultimately infiltrate the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. We have arrested those individuals as well. We have employed new technology, again, an opportunity to never miss a moment, to leverage some technology and even state funding, if we can find our way to that, so that we now, before we hire an individual, we'll see how many contacts they've had with our detainees, what that looks like. Those individuals don't get hired, right? Especially if there's any omission from that perspective. One of the things that, so minus the bad apples, one of the things that has continued to plague us is drones. And the technology to detect and deter drones has really caused a major problem in our infrastructure. At one point, the last couple of weeks, every other day, somebody was cutting the fence line, actually surveilling the facility first using drones. And because of the FAA requirements, we can't just simply, as I wanted to, as I harken back to 1988, I wanted to just shoot them down. We can't do that. So ultimately, there is technology out there to help us with that. And so those are the kinds of things, either through state grants or anything that we can use, we certainly want to be able to do that. But at one point, we had as many as 3 or 4 insertions a week where people were cutting through, surveilling with drones, and even having drones drop off packages. And now it's more prevalent in a prison environment, given the guard line and what that looks like. But again, we have, those are the kinds of things that, and where some of these things come from. And then I'll leave you with this, and I remind people, just because people are in jail doesn't mean they are not smart. And so one instance, we are up in the middle of a shakedown, it's flooding, and I actually have somebody from maintenance, our maintenance team, that's saying, well, I'll go down and get this part. And the actual detainee said, no, you need to get this part. I'm a certified plumber. Bring it back up here and we'll help you fix it. And that's what happened. So again, I'll leave room for any questions or anything, senators, that you may have.
I don't see anything, Sheriff. What I'd love to, if we could transition into, if you're prepared for it, as I would like to discuss staffing a little bit, as now that we see the number of citizens who are being held in your county jail. Now, if we can talk about how you're addressing it, and I also have to point this out as when people go through this, and I know our friends in fire service don't want to be left out of the conversation because fire stations are 24/7, 365. But the only building that really has a strong heartbeat 365 days a year, government building, and 24 hours a day, and every second of every day is the county jail. And it's a fully functioning microcosm of the city in which it's housed. And so Senator Albers and I know on the tour we went into, all of the common areas were pretty clean. Like I tell everybody, somebody asked me what the county jail looked like. I said it looked like every other county jail. It's really ugly and really clean because of the multiple coats of paint and everything else we have to do while we're shifting bodies from one side of the building to the other side of the building while we do maintenance on a different side of the building and this kind of stuff. But the inmate housing area, the individual bunk spaces, were, as the individual that lived there apparently was comfortable with them being, because as opposed to most housing areas, there is no housekeeper coming in there cleaning up and making up beds. And most of these individuals that come in there, to go back to your word, Sheriff, they're not there for singing too loud in the choir. And so they're not used to keeping their personal space clean and orderly. And so that also not only helps deteriorate the building even more, but also gives them a lot of opportunity to camouflage contraband, to camouflage other criminal behaviors that may be occurring inside the facility. So do you have enough staff to manage all of the chaos that's happening in this building, including in those small hidden spaces where a lot of this chaos is happening?
So first, thank you, and
Yeah.
I will, again, that's a lot to unpack, and I say it from this perspective. The women and men that work at the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, I could not be more honored to serve them, could not be more honored that the method in which they serve our community, both those that are in custody and both that are out of custody. Specifically, we are working from a 2015 staffing analysis. On average, it'll cost us $400,000 to update that staffing analysis. When the staffing analysis was done, we were 400 or 500 people short in 2015. So ultimately, and this again is opportunity, as I view it, the lens that I look through for the state, and you all, as you all have supported law enforcement, really in everything that you've done, and we certainly appreciate that. I don't speak for everybody. I only speak for the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. Every time that you all have stepped in to help us do our job, we certainly appreciate that. Let me give you some of our stats. When we started, our full strength is 1,283 individuals. That is, we had funding for everybody. But ultimately, what we end up having to do to pay fair market rate or pay for promotions or pay for the bonus, we hire individuals and we give them a $10,500 bonus, but that comes out of our budget. So then we have to unfund positions to then fund the operations. So where there's opportunity for us to continue in that, we want to be able to do that as well. Ultimately, right now we have 1,007 authorized positions, 869 current employees, meaning that we have the rest of vacancies. We have a total of 632 sworn, 237. We don't call civilians, we call them professional staff. Right, our professional staff, and I say that because whether it be payroll or processing the identification for detainees, whatever it is, we cannot operate without them.
Sheriff, what was your sworn number?
So, sworn is 632.
Thank you.
And so that'll come out to 869, the rest being vacant from that 1,007. Everything else above that has been unfunded so that we can operate. Ultimately, to date, we have 36 deputy sheriff positions that are vacant, 16 DO positions that are vacant, another 43 positions that are vacant that are our professional team. The piece that is also good news, if you will, is that we have 27 individuals that are in the cycle for hiring, and ultimately it is worth the good news to share that this year alone we've hired 227 new individuals. Individuals have joined our team, but we've also had 159 separations. It also bears, again, an opportunity to work with the Board of Commissioners, if you will. Earlier this year, we were also paying individuals that worked in the jail facility, whether you were working on the street and you came in to work an overtime shift or specifically working in the jail itself. Instead of paying them time and a half for overtime, we paid them double time. Our goal was triple time. We hadn't made it there yet, but that then is going away on the 19th.
19th
Right.
of December.
19th of December, that'll go away. Hopefully, there'll be some additional funding as
The
we
double
go.
time goes away?
It goes away.
And goes to what, time and a half?
It goes back to time and a half.
Okay.
And hopefully that will be revisited by the Board of Commissioners in terms of, because you could see the immediate impact. You can also see the immediate impact of the resignations based on, or the attrition based on both retirement as well as people going to other agencies once the double time goes away. So that is really a caption of our employment status and where we are and what that looks like.
I know you had mentioned, Sheriff, that the staffing study was done some time ago.
Yes.
In that will be your opinion, for you wanting to run your jail the way I know you want to run it, what would be that total number of people that you say, if I had this, I'd be aces across the board?
So right now, again, given how we fund and unfund individuals, we're at 1,007 individuals or 1,107 team members. I'd love for us to be closer to 1,500 and have the funding to be able to get to that and pay people. Look, at one point we were talking about paying people hazardous duty pay just to work in the jail, and bringing some of those detention officers up to, there is a nomenclature, if you will, having been in law enforcement, that deputy sheriffs are here on this level, and detention officers, for as long as I was a detention officer, were second-class citizens. But to be able to bring that up and make it a job of choice is part of what we want to do. So at this moment in time, realistically, if we can get to 1,500, that would really offset some of the things that we are doing currently. That does not mean that as the future, as we delve into the future and crime continues at this pace, that we won't need more. What I've asked for and hope we can facilitate in 2024 is that ultimately we take the same staffing company, because I want to compare apples to apples, and get an updated staffing analysis, which we could really have fierce conversations about. And then the other thing I want to make sure we note is that when we talk about our vacancies, how we get to those numbers versus how county HR gets to those numbers is somewhat different, but ultimately it does not include those that are on FMLA, those that are on workers' comp, so it's important to take those numbers into consideration as well.
Thank you.
Sheriff, how do you get to the number 1,500?
Ultimately, if you look at where the pieces that we have unfunded,
And
right
the
now-
unfunded is the difference between 1,283 and 1,117? Or was 1,007?
Correct.
Right,
So that's
okay.
the difference there. So if we provide the funding for that and we can get back to the 1,283, the 2015 analysis said we were already 300 or 400 people short in 2015. So I don't want to be greedy, but if we can turn back and even go by those numbers and fund up to the 1,500, that's where, again, a new staffing analysis that, 8-10 years later would probably reveal more. And so that's the
Now,
biggest piece.
To be clear, the 1,283 number, or we'll just go the 1,007 number, that includes street deputies, and that's the entire sheriff's office, correct?
Correct.
That's not just the jail?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Of the 1,007, how many of those are assigned to the jail and how many are assigned outside the jail? And Sheriff, correct me if I'm wrong, you have street deputies and you also have court deputies and other assignments, right?
Correct.
So help us understand, you have the jail bureau, is that how you identify it?
The jail division.
Jail division, okay, and what other divisions are there?
Okay, so you have the jail division, the court division, law enforcement, specialized units, such as SWAT, such as our criminal investigation division, as well as our traffic unit division, our admin division. And when I say, let me and OPS, Internal Affairs. So let me,
OPS, Office of Professional Standards, right?
correct.
Okay.
And let me also provide some additional clarity. When we say units, for instance, we're talking about a traffic unit that has 6 people in it.
Right.
Right, we're talking about a SWAT team that if we can get to 22 full-time people, that would be huge for us. When we talk about a crime suppression unit, you're talking about 10 people.
Right.
Ultimately, you also have to take into consideration, and our motors unit, which has 6 individuals. Right? You have
When you
to
say
take-
motors, you're talking about motorcycles.
Absolutely,
Right.
thank you. We also have to take into consideration that we have the 2 or 3 largest trials in the Southeast to ever take place, 2 of which are gang trials. So those units now have been working court since the beginning of the year and working transportation, getting those individuals to and from court safely. And so while their mission still remains to serve our community, it has been jail-focused from that perspective. To your question, in terms of the jail staff itself, we got 387 sworn individuals, team members working there, and 105. But again, allowing those outside units.
The 105's professional staff?
Professional staff, correct. And it allows us to have the motors unit, for instance, come in on a Friday night and work intake. Or if there's any disturbances, to have the traffic unit come in and work whatever that floor is. The other thing that's really important to note, two quick things. We have partnered with the Board of Commissioners, and we received funding to bring in a third party to man the towers themselves. And so our contract calls for 87 individuals from a third-party company to man the towers. So we've gotten up to 50 or 51?
48 as of today.
48 as of today. We had a high of 51, but again, they have the same hiring concerns that we have across the state. And here's something else that's really important, and I'm proud that we as an administration, and certainly working with the Board of Commissioners, were able to do. When I took office, every individual, before they got paid overtime, had to amass or collect 480 hours of leave time.
Compensatory time.
Compensatory time before they could get paid overtime. And then ultimately, if you used any of that compensatory time, you had to, before you can make overtime again, you had to amass that time again. And so we were losing individuals across the board that could go to different agencies and immediately make overtime. So we removed that obstacle, and now
Was
we
that
pay overtime.
based on a 28-day cycle? Is that how that time was accumulated?
71 days.
71 day?
Every
Okay.
2 weeks.
Every 2, okay.
Correct. And it was, and believe it or not, when I became sheriff, I thought it was illegal at best, until I sat with some attorneys, as we mentioned earlier, Mr. Chairman, who came in, who said, "No, it's not illegal, it's just unfortunate." And so we were able to stem that tide, and it makes a difference when people can see the overtime that they're working.
So the 387 and the 105 are divided into how many shifts?
Right now, we're working 12-hour shifts.
Okay.
That is something we migrated to. And it also bears mentioning that anybody that's assigned to the jail also gets 5 additional hours on their paycheck, every paycheck.
Okay.
They call it jail pay.
12 hours, how many days on, how many days off?
So it's 3 on,
3 days on,
2, yeah.
3 days on, 3 days off, 2 days on, 2 days off. And that's 171.
3 on, 3 off, and then 2 on, 2 off?
Right.
Yeah.
And the best part of that is the way it is structured, and having, again, I go back to 1988, where you used to have to come to work 5, 10 years before you get any part of the weekend off. At this point, every other weekend you get at least a part of the weekend off.
Yeah, well, when I started, it was 4 days on, 4 days off, so we got a weekend, 4 days on, 2 days off, so I got a weekend about every 6 weeks.
Right.
And then Christmas was just another day.
Right.
Because the jail runs. So out of 1,007, we're looking at the 387 and the 105 being assigned to the jail, in addition to currently 48 third-party contract employees. And you say they work in the tower, so my assumption is all they do is control doors?
That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no inmate contact.
No inmate contact at all?
And I would, as you do your calculations, I would use the 869. The 1,007 includes vacancies.
Right. And are you short-staffed throughout? Is it just the jail, or the other bureaus short-staffed also?
Oh, yeah, we're short-staffed across the agency.
And real quick, what's an obligation for somebody to get a $10,500 bonus? Are they obligated to stay with the agency a certain amount of time?
3 years.
Yes.
And if they should leave before 3 years, they owe you $10,500?
Well, it's prorated.
Right.
It's prorated, and again, lessons learned. When we first started the program, we paid as much as we could up front. Then we cut it in half. Then we cut it in quarters. Now it is divided into 12 months. And so it is almost, instead of starting, and it's important to note, instead of starting as a deputy at 60,000, you would start at essentially 70,000. Instead of starting as a detention officer at 50 or 55,000, you'd start at 60 or 65,000, based on the bonus. And then it's prorated, as Chief said, and if you leave, we come to get our money.
What differentiates an applicant walking in, applying as a deputy sheriff or applying as a detention officer?
Really the skill set and their ability to go to mandate or go to basic peace officer standard training council. Peace officer
basic
standard
mandate,
training,
yeah.
basic mandate. But ultimately, the other piece of that is we do have individuals that come in, start out as detention officers and want to move to deputy sheriffs. There is a 10 to 15% pay increase and the ability to do other things than work in the jail.
Okay. And is it your belief that if we paid jail officers more than we paid street officers, that the jail would be a more attractive place to work?
I believe it would be so. I don't believe from the law enforcement perspective, and I don't speak for everybody, it won't be the same. There is a eliteness about being in law enforcement, about being able to protect and serve those in our community that people really gravitate toward. And I'll steal a phrase from Colonel Clark: I don't believe ever in a day, and we had this discussion that somebody got up and said, I want to work in a jail, right? Those words were never uttered. But I do want to protect and serve. I do want to be in law enforcement. And the basic opportunity, I think if we, whether it be educational incentive and opportunities to move, and we do this pretty aggressively, and that is give people opportunities, move from detention officer to deputy sheriff. So there is an opportunity here that we pay them more, as we said, in terms of the jail pay and hazardous duty pay and the things that come along with that.
And I think, Chief Major Colonel Clark, I think some of it is, and I've met people throughout my career that did say, when we offered them opportunities to come out of the jail, they said, no, I want to stay in the jail. Reason being, it's an entirely different environment. The closeness of the unit that works inside the jail is entirely different than once you get out on a patrol squad or investigative unit and stuff like that. But there is that thing you talk about, Sheriff, where you walk in the back door of the county jail as a street deputy, there's a certain amount of unintentional, sometimes, arrogance that comes, in your gait when you walk in, knowing that you're going to be able to walk back out, get in your car, and you get to pick where you eat dinner that night, as long as it's in there. So I do think there's still a little bit of that bias in our profession that we need to figure out a way to solve.
Yeah, and one thing I want you to know is that the bonuses that we are paying in 2023 aren't currently part of our 2024 funding, so we won't have the ability to pay those bonuses going into the new budget cycle.
So the bonuses are going away?
Correct.
Unless we
Okay.
find a creative way to fund it. We'd have to unfund positions, things of that nature.
And so my assumption is you prepare your budget, you take it to the county commission after much debate, gnashing of teeth, then it comes out, and in this case, you ask for to maintain the additional bonuses, but the county felt it was physically better not to do that.
And to be fair, we are in the embryonic stages of our budget process.
Yeah.
So we have asked for those enhancements. We have asked for those continuations of both the funding, even has gone as far as saying provide the funding for the unfunded positions. And so I certainly applaud our CFO for the work that she's doing. And ultimately, we will come January, February, we'll see where we land on that.
And I don't want to put the impression out, and I know Chairman Albers said something at the beginning, we are not trying to pit
I know.
anybody against anybody. We just, to get to trying to figure out what the issues are and to understand it, we ask these questions. We respect all four of the groups that are involved in the running and maintaining of a county jail. And so, and I haven't heard your team today or in the past meeting say anything derogatory about the county commission or the district attorney's office or the judiciary, anybody else.
I do think it is worth mentioning, you mentioned a deputy sheriff coming in the back door and the bravado, the bravado that
Unintentional,
goes-
but it's just part of the chemistry.
And so I certainly don't speak for the other 158 sheriffs, but I would love to have a team that was all deputy sheriffs, all right, which allow for, and I appreciate the detention officer perspective, because everybody doesn't want to be on the street, to your point, but to be able to create parity between the detention officers and the deputy sheriff would go a long way.
Well, and I think the other thing we think about is medical transport and other things where the individual's assigned to the jail, but they do have to do things occasionally that do require a post-certified or at least qualified.
Correct.
Firearm-wise or whatever-wise to make transports, whether it's to DOC or whether it's to Grady or wherever else, and of course in the courtrooms and all of that. I think it would establish that. But then again, bottom line is we're talking about funding.
Correct.
And we have to hire people that are able to qualify and pass the mandate, EVOC, all the other things that come along with it. And with the issues we're having right now of hiring good qualified officers, I think we've all experienced throughout our career people that just couldn't quite cut it because of some of those issues.
Correct.
I mean, you would think, Sheriff, that if you and I were able to do it, anybody should be able to do it, but it doesn't always work out that way,
I
right?
agree. I agree.
Thank you.
Nobody was
Thank
thinking that.
All right. Anything else y'all want to add, Sheriff, related to the county jail, the overcrowding issues that you have at the county jail, the unique populations you have there, or staffing issues?
We appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation. We are always available. We look forward to you all coming back, or any of your colleagues that want to come and take a firsthand look. We invite you to do that. And if there's anything we can do, certainly as you are in our capital city, coming to and from your districts, that we can help you with as the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, we stand ready to do that.
Thank you, Sheriff. We're going to go ahead and take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come up and give our friends at PAC an opportunity to gear up.
Thank you.
When we first started talking about the jail overcrowding, the Fulton County jail issues, and everything else, what we learned really quickly is that not only does the average citizen not understand the difference between a jail and a prison, but the average citizen, thanks to Hollywood and tax credits and everything else, they don't understand how the criminal justice system works. They'll watch a 60-minute show, not including commercials, and it'll start with somebody getting arrested, and 57 minutes later, they're convicted and out the door. And they don't understand all, and I mean thousands of moving pieces and parts that are within the criminal justice system. And a lot of that energy is housed in one area, and that's in the prosecutor's office. He or she will determine, in some cases, whether there will even be a case to begin with. And once there is, based on a lot of factors and a lot of case law, will determine the speed of that case and understand 1 mile an hour is the speed. So to answer that, the expert in the state of Georgia, without a doubt, is PAC. And they understand both sides of it better than anyone. So I reached out to their director, Pete Skandalakis, and asked if he would please help us. And he said absolutely right off. So, Pete, I want to welcome you and your team here today. And what I want you to do is educate us, those of us in the room and those watching, on what exactly it takes once someone gets arrested to get them through the criminal justice system. And understanding that a large portion of that time they are sitting in a county jail as they're waiting for the system to work.
Yes, sir, I'd be glad to. Again, my name's Pete Skandalakis. I'm the Executive Director for the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. Prior to that, and I've been in that role about 5 years, prior to that I was the elected DA of the Coweta Circuit for 25 years. The Coweta Circuit is 5 counties just southwest here of Atlanta. And prior to being the elected DA, I served as the assistant DA there for 7 years. Seated to my right, your left, is Robert Smith. Robert is the Prosecuting Attorney's Council, legal counsel, and also my legislative genius. Robert knows more about what's in the code book than I'll ever remember, and absolutely knows where to find it, so I'm very fortunate to have him. I also want to say, and I would be remiss if I didn't commend Sheriff Labatt and his team for the excellent work they do. I've known the sheriff for years now, and he's always willing and able to assist us on criminal justice matters, and has a great voice of reason. And I've said, of course, I've seen 5 county jails operated in my circuit. I've said this: you couldn't pay me to be a sheriff. To operate a jail, and I think Chairman Robertson commented on this, it's really like a little city. It's a little city that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you have all sorts of individuals who come into that facility. And you have to deal with not only them, but you also have to deal with their families, their loved ones, and then you also have the responsibility of dealing with, if they have victimized somebody, the victims, because the victims want to know when is a court date, when is everything happening. So all that comes to fruition when you have to run a jail. And the sheriff commented on this, and he touched on this. And before I even start, let me say this: I am not an expert on how the Fulton County District Attorney's Office operates, nor am I an expert on how the Fulton County Sheriff's Department operates. I have not visited the Fulton County Jail, and my visits to Fulton County DA's office have been meetings with District Attorney Willis on other matters other than the caseload. So please understand, if I get any questions concerning those, I would refer those back to the sheriff and the district attorney and the Solicitor General, Keith Gamage, who happens to serve as a council member on my board. That being said, I think you have heard here that running a jail and anything in the criminal justice system is labor intensive. You have to have people inside the jail to manage the jail. You have to have, even before you start managing the jail, you're talking about police officers and detectives making arrests, bringing people to the jail. You have to have defense attorneys who are willing to meet with their clients who are sitting in jail. And again, when we talk about people in jail, we're talking about pre-conviction. For the most part, they have not been convicted of any offenses. They're waiting to hear what disposition is on their case. And you need to have prosecutors who have the time and the ability to talk to the defense lawyers about a possible outcome. The sheriff is commenting on this, and I need to mention this as well, because y'all know this. We're having trouble hiring prosecutors. We're having trouble hiring defense attorneys. When you have trouble filling those positions, you're going to have trouble moving cases. You can hire as many judges as you want. I heard y'all talking about night court, and I got a little bit nervous there, because you can hire as many judges as you want. You can pay judges whatever you want. But if there aren't people working those cases, getting those cases filed, and getting those cases negotiated, absolutely what you're going to have is a judge sitting on the bench with a court reporter there waiting for something to happen. And that's just a poor use of resources. So those are problems we're facing. Chairman Robertson mentioned about what happens with an arrest. Please be mindful, we kind of have a checks and balances. We do have a checks and balances when it comes to the criminal justice system. To make an arrest is probable cause. Probable cause is slight evidence that the person accused of a crime may have committed the crime. Another way to say it is he or she probably committed the crime. However, to get a conviction, you have to be able to prove to a jury guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And so one of the roles of a prosecutor is to take those cases and screen them out and get rid of those cases. And I say get rid of them, and I know sometimes you have victims who are offended, but one of your roles is to utilize your resources in an ability to get the job done. And if that means you can't make a conviction, you have to make that hard decision. So let me start this with an arrest. An arrest is based on probable cause. Now, you do have misdemeanors, and the sheriff indicated you have misdemeanors. Some misdemeanors are simply citations. A police officer stops you on the side of the road, writes you a speeding ticket, you sign the ticket, and you go on. Other misdemeanors are fingerprintable, which means that if you have to be fingerprinted, you have to, some departments have enough resources, they can fingerprint you at the station, or they can probably even fingerprint you in a patrol car now. I'm not sure about that. But then you go on your way. Others, sometimes it has to be fingerprinted. You're brought into the police station, or you're even brought into the county jail and you're fingerprinted. And sometimes there might be the need to make a bond on those offenses. Usually there's a bond schedule. You make those bonds and you go about your way. Then you have the felonies, the Title 16 cases. Police officer has probable cause to make an arrest on, let's just say, a child molestation. They make that arrest on a child molestation. They bring that person in. You have what is called a first appearance hearing. That is, within 72 hours, you have to have a first appearance hearing to see if there's probable cause in front of a magistrate. Some magistrates have hearings in which the police officer will testify. If you are lucky, there'll be a defense attorney there and a prosecutor there that can hear this evidence and can make a decision about whether or not this case needs to go on. But let's just say you find probable cause. That person, if there's a bond schedule, or if it's even a, what's it called, bail restriction? A bail restriction would have to be in front of a superior court.
Pete, can I
Yes, sir.
ask you a real quick question? You just said if you find probable cause at the first
Appearance.
appearance. does the level of probable cause, and rhetorical question, does the level of probable cause change from the arrest to the first hearing, or does the magistrate hold it to the same standard, basically just someone stepping up there saying this person did this?
Same standard. It says this person did this. The magistrate can consider hearsay testimony, third-party testimony, all that. So same standard.
So on rare occasion are these types of felonies dismissed at a first appearance?
That's correct. Very rare.
Yeah.
If you get past that probable cause, which 99% of the time you will, and you haven't made bond, you can request a first appearance hearing. A preliminary hearing. A preliminary hearing, it can be in front of a magistrate, it can be in front of a judge, a Superior Court judge or a state court judge, in which the judge will consider evidence and decide, is there sufficient evidence that this case should go on? You can put up witnesses. Again, you're allowed to put up hearsay testimony during this preliminary hearing. And also at this preliminary hearing, the judge can reconsider the bond if a bond has been set, the conditional bond, and he or she can reduce the bond and also set conditions on that. The judge can also decide that, well, I'm not even sure you've made probable cause in your preliminary hearing, therefore I'm going to dismiss this case. And the judge can dismiss this case. And here's where it gets kind of interesting. If a judge does dismiss a felony case, you can continue to work that felony case, and you can bring that case to a grand jury, which can then issue an indictment. So the grand jury has the ability to consider charges that have been dismissed and also charges that haven't even been filed. For example, you have an armed robbery and a gang-related case. Let's just say your magistrate doesn't like gang cases, just doesn't care for them. So your magistrate judge dismisses the gang charge, but finds probable cause on the armed robbery to bind it over to Superior Court. When you bring that case to a grand jury, you can charge the gang case again, and you can add additional charges. So a grand jury has that ability, and a grand jury is an accusatory body. That is, their job is to find probable cause, and if they find probable cause on the charges, you can add those charges and take that case on. I know y'all are familiar with 90 days from the time of arrest to the time you get a case to grand jury. You have 90 days. If you don't make that 90-day period, that doesn't mean the case is dismissed. All it means is that person has a right to go in front of a judge and ask that that his or her bond be lowered. In Georgia, everyone is entitled to a bond. So you don't have many cases, or any cases that I know of, where there's just absolutely no bond set. You're entitled to a bond. So when you come back in front of that judge after 90 days, that judge can set a bond, even on a murder case. It could be $1 million or $2 million. It could be less. It could be, $50, depending upon the strength of the case. But you are entitled to a bond. And one of the things that we talk about is efficiency of the system. During the pandemic, the legislature, in its wisdom, made a few changes where you could file a lot of cases. I won't say who exactly I was talking about, but the legislature, in its wisdom, made changes where not every felony case had to go before the grand jury, which means you could file accusations with the clerk of court, and that would speed up the process. Serious violent felonies still had to be filed with the grand jury. Of course, some grand juries didn't meet, so we had to wait to file those cases. That is something that you may wish to consider to speed up the process. And I'm sure the defense bar will weigh in on that as well. Let's see.
Pete, when you said some grand juries don't meet, and
didn't meet during the pandemic.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But even now, we have grand juries say, when you're talking about Fulton County, Muskogee County, you got grand juries meeting on a regular basis. But in some of the rural parts of the state, grand juries meet quarterly in some cases.
That's correct, and
Yeah.
you beat me to the question. Some grand juries meet, for example, Fulton County has 2 grand juries meeting all the time because they are indicting, I think, something like 1,000 cases a month. Some grand juries meet quarterly, and then you might have some counties that only have the grand jury meeting once every 6 months, which means if it's one of the serious violent felonies or you haven't negotiated a case, you won't see another grand jury. Once they are excused, you won't see another grand jury till, if you have one in January, you won't see one until June or July.
So that means somebody incarcerated in one of those circuits would sit in jail while they're waiting. Now, they have the opportunity to go ask for a bond to be lowered or a bond if they don't have a bond.
That's right.
But they would still have to wait, like you said, 6 months or a year for their case to go to a grand jury for an opportunity to get a no bill.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Okay.
right. And sometimes you may want to know, how did the DA miss the 90 days? How did the DA miss the 90 days? Please be mindful that just like in law enforcement, you may have a detective that is working 30 or 40 cases a month. You take that case, those 30 or 40 cases by one detective in one municipality, you multiply that by 5 or 6 municipalities, maybe a couple of counties. For example, I had 26 different police jurisdictions that filed cases with the DA's office in my circuit. You take those 30 cases, you multiply it by the number of officers, they're filing cases all the time. Some cases are easy to prepare, easy to review. Some cases take some time. Some cases, even though you have probable cause and even though you can make out the case, the DA or assistant DA or assistant solicitor general wants more evidence because you have to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. So they're sending their investigators out into the field to interview witnesses, to collect phone records, to maybe get DNA testing, to do all this additional information so they can make a case that is prosecutable where you can convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that this person committed this crime. So those cases, you may miss that 90 days. And you will tell the court, Your Honor, we're waiting for this information, or Your Honor, we're waiting for this information. Your Honor, the case file is not complete. And then the judge will take that in consideration and set a bond. That's not to say that even after indictment, you continue to work on cases. I cannot think of an instance where you had a major case, child molestation, aggravated sodomy, rape, homicide, where you are not constantly working that case almost all the way up to the time that it goes to trial. And of course, you also have, once the grand jury meets, this case will go to what is called an arraignment. An arraignment is where the defendant pleads guilty or not guilty. What you don't want to do is indict a case before it's ready to go to trial, before you can prove your case, indict it, go to arraignment, and then have defense counsel file a motion for speedy trial knowing that you're months behind trying to get information you're trying to get. So that may be another reason that you don't make the 90 days. That is not usual in the course of business, but it does happen, and it does happen often. And I think that the fact the legislature understands it happens often is how we got the 90 days plus you're entitled to another bond hearing. So once arraignment hits, you plead guilty or not guilty. If you plead guilty, the judge will send it down for a sentencing hearing sometime in the future. Be mindful too now, and I have so much to cover and I don't want to waste y'all's time, but be mindful as this case progresses through the criminal justice system, from preliminary hearing to either accusation or grand jury or arraignment. If there is a victim involved, under Georgia law, we are constantly, the prosecutors, the prosecution-based victim services is constantly notifying the victim, hey, there's a bond hearing on this day. Hey, there's an arraignment day on this day. Hey, this is the day that this case will be indicted. You don't have to be here, but I thought you'd like to know. Or this is the case the defendant's going to plead guilty. This is the day that he'll be sentenced, he or she be sentenced. You have a right to make a statement to the court. So that is also happening simultaneously to this case moving through the system.
Now, Pete, when you say the DA or the ADA is notifying this, is that the victim's witness service?
Yes, sir. The victim advocates, the prosecution-based victim
Who
advocates.
is housed within the DA's office and is an employee of the district attorney,
Yes, sir.
correct? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So if the defendant pleads guilty on arraignment day, it goes to a sentencing hearing. If the defendant pleads not guilty, it goes to a trial court calendar. Now, most judges, depending upon what circuit you're in, will also hear motions before it gets to the trial court. Before it gets to trial, I'm sorry. Those motions can be anything from standard motions for discovery, where we have to give over the evidence that we have to the defense counsel, and the defense counsel if they...
Pete, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I want to back
No,
up real
that's
real
fine,
quick.
because I'm going...
On the arraignment side, when you say if the person comes up and pleads guilty at arraignment, would it not be true that there's a lot of negotiations happening prior to arraignment? So if the person was going to come up and plead guilty, that there's already some kind of deal between the defense attorney and the DA's office based on sentencing or whether it's probation or whatever. Would you say the majority of that pretrial negotiations happens prior to arraignment or after arraignment?
The only thing I can tell you is my experience in my circuit, whereas things have changed, have evolved for years. And that is prior to, I'd say, 10, 20 years ago, we would take a number of pleas at arraignment. We were able to negotiate cases with defense counsel, so when arraignment came up, we could move those cases. Since that time, I would say probably about 10 years ago, most defendants plead not guilty at arraignment, and the plea negotiations occur between arraignment and trial calendars. Okay. Because that has been my experience lately. So, you know, you would like to have more time, and that's one of the things that we used to, quite frankly, when I first started, you had grand jury on Monday, you had arraignment on Friday, because we only did like 30 or 40 cases. This was back in 1984 when I had hair, okay? So you had grand jury on Monday, you had arraignment on Friday, and then you had 1 week later, the next Monday, not the following Monday from that Friday, but a week, we started jury trials on that calendar. And we took a lot of pleas on arraignment, but we were constantly moving. And back then, it was a 5-county circuit. There was only 5 assistant DAs, and we literally rode the circuit with our 3 superior court judges, and that's what we did in every county. Things have changed. I mean, we've gone from indicting 30 cases a month to 30 cases every 3 months, I'm sorry, to doing 60 cases a month just in my circuit. So you have discovery, you have motions, you have, not only that, you have defense lawyers filing motions to suppress. You have defense lawyers filing motion to compel discovery because they may believe they haven't got everything. So you're constantly going through these battles too now. As you're going through those battles, y'all are well aware, prior to the pandemic, a lot of circuits had case backlogs. Everybody talks about the pandemic backlog. I always point out we had a backlog before the pandemic. The pandemic has just increased that backlog. So you're not only the judges, the defense lawyers, and the prosecutors working these cases, they're also working new cases that come in. Also having more motions hearings, more bond hearings. Not to mention the people that you have sentenced and have got a split sentence, let's say, or just a straight probated sentence. What you really hope for is that a lot of those people will toe the line, will finish their probation and good productive citizens. Unfortunately, some of them do not, so now you're back in court doing probation revocations. And that all depends when the judge wants to set that down to do probation revocations. You do have probation management, which on technical issues like y'all were talking about, the probation officers can kind of work out a a solution with the person who's on probation, so it doesn't clog up the court system, and then it comes through there. Death penalty cases are a completely different animal. They may last years just going through the system to get to the trial. I don't know how many cases we now have in Georgia with death penalty cases, but those are completely different animals. Let's see.
Pete, real quick, the process you're talking about, and you saw the numbers the sheriff put up there, and
Yes, sir.
And you heard I'd read a recent study that said 26 days is the average stay in a county jail. The process you're talking about, we're talking, and we'll go to your circuit, which now I think is represented by Herb Cranford
Yes, sir.
over there. I mean, is it reasonable to think that? Well, what do you think? And I won't hold you to it, but what's a reasonable amount of time that you would expect somebody to go through all of the processes that you're talking about, charged with a serious felony, not a capital case? But what's a reasonable time if an individual's not going to make bond and get out?
A reasonable time to get him to trial?
Correct. I mean,
Wow.
well, let's look at an aggravated assault, where the individual wants their day in court. I mean,
I can't answer that because of this reason.
right?
Let's just take an aggravated assault, and the person has not made bond. And so, and he hasn't made bond because, and understand, if he or she hasn't made bond, he or she's had a bond hearing in front of a judge. There's no doubt about that. But if the judge has looked at the case and found one of 4 criteria, he's likely to commit another offense, which means he's got a prior offense on his record. He's likely to intimidate witnesses, or he's likely to flee the jurisdiction of the court, or he's likely to, what's the 4th one?
Commit another felony.
I already said that one.
Flee. Danger to property, community.
Danger to others, or poses
Intimidating witness.
of intimidating witnesses. The judge will not reduce that bond. So let's just say that this person's sitting in jail, he's been indicted, then he goes on a trial calendar. Where does that case rank on a trial calendar compared to the other cases that were before him? In other words, you know, if you have homicide cases, those usually come first. Child abuse, rape cases, particularly child abuse cases, the further you get away from the time the child was abused, the harder it becomes to get a conviction. And the reason for that is because you don't want to re-traumatize the child. You don't want to have a child who is 8 years old waiting 3 or 4 years for him or her to testify in court. So those cases, prosecutors try to push to the top of the calendar.
And who controls the calendar?
The judge does.
Okay.
The judge does, but
How much influence does the prosecutor have on the judge, would you say, in getting those types of cases up there? Because, I mean, they work shoulder to shoulder on a lot of this stuff, right?
I think the judges understand that those people in custody take priority. So any cases in custody, and the longer serving cases will get priority over those. So if you have a person arrested for aggravated assault, he or she hasn't probably been in very long. The homicide case on the trial calendar is going to get first, and then it's going to be, you know, the child molestation cases, rapes, anything of that nature. Did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Also depends on witness availability.
Oh, and like Robert said, depends on witness availability too. Because sometimes the judge say, well, we're going to make this case first, and you'll say, Judge, we got a witness who's a medical examiner with a crime lab. He can't be here that day. Can we push this off to this day? So you have all those issues. So not to try to, you know, dodge your question, but it's so hard to answer because an aggravated assault sitting by itself, I'd say 6 months to 9 months, you ought to be able to try it. But nothing sits by itself in a courthouse. Nothing sits by itself.
What I jump back to is that 400 number of murders that we sitting there, and then we have these other cases coming in that are not murders, that are not child molestation cases, and so there is going to be an issue with a backlog.
Yes.
Because the prosecutor is focused on those cases you're talking about where you have to get the witnesses in there. You don't want to re-traumatize a child on some of those cases. So that was where I went back to, what's the responsibility of the attorneys to negotiate? And look, everybody's has a right to their day in court and to plead guilty and to a jury trial, bench trial, whatever they choose. But while we're prioritizing homicides, we're backing up, especially when we look at 400 and something homicides in the Fulton County Jail.
True, and again, I don't know the specifics of those 400 cases. I don't know which cases are ready to go to trial, which cases still have work to be done on them. But be mindful, the criminal justice system is not like a business, because even though you have prosecutors over here and you have defense lawyers over here and you have detectives over here, you still have one person who makes the ultimate decision. And it's not the judge, it's the person accused of a crime. So the defense attorney may have worked his or her tail off getting a negotiated deal that he thinks is great, and goes to his client and says, hey, listen, I've got a great deal here. And the client says, don't want it, not going to take it. Or the defense attorney will say, the prosecutor's not willing to budge. What do you want to do? Let's go to trial. So the system, and all y'all know this because you do this in your private lives. There's a point where negotiations kind of come to an end, and you say, there's no more talking here. We got to get you on a trial calendar. And when we get you on a trial calendar, that's when the decision's going to be made. And then there's some cases, for example, murder. Murder has, unless you're seeking the death penalty, murder has, one of three results. Life in prison, which means you're going to do 30 years before you're eligible, life without parole, or not guilty, and you walk. So, some of those cases you can't negotiate. You have to try them. And we've had a number of those in my circuit.
Pete, if I could just for a moment, I want to make sure that I'm testing my logic on this. From what I have understood in the work we have done before and during this committee, most of the time that just getting that date scheduled kickstarts the process and deals are reached, and the system tends to flow very quickly. Is that a fair statement?
When you say getting that date, you're talking about a trial date?
Trial date, yes.
Yes, sir. I think the trial date, having a case on a trial calendar where you have jury panel coming in, helps that negotiation process.
I think it would be helpful, Mr. Chairman, for us as we continue to get more data points of looking where does the current challenges we're having in Fulton, right, which are holding people in the jail, of getting folks necessarily to a trial date to move that faster. What is that in relation to other counties throughout the state? I'd be curious to know, is there a gold standard out there of the one you can say, boy, they figured something out, and can we apply those best practices across the board?
I think that would be very difficult, and I say that for this reason. There are 159 counties in this state. My experience has been there's 159 different ways to do things, not to mention the volume of cases that Fulton County deals with. Now, when you talk about having a date, let me, because I have to preface it this way. When you talk about having a trial date, I'm talking about serious violent felonies, being able to move those. Cases that are easily moved, for example, pretrial diversion, deferred prosecution. We dismissed a lot of cases, and when I say a lot, again, our standard was if you didn't believe in your heart a person was guilty of a crime, you had no business prosecuting it. And our screening process was such that my assistant DAs would decline to prosecute 29 to 30% of the cases that were filed, simply because we couldn't make probable cause.
In decline to prosecute, so what you're saying is the person was arrested, they were placed in the county jail, they had their initial hearing, probable cause hearings, everything went. It lands on an investigator's desk. Investigator looks at the ADA that they're responsible to and said, hey, look, there's just not enough here. So does that DA, do they go to the grand jury and ask for a no bill, or do they do a null pros and just refuse to prosecute?
And what we had vertical prosecution, which means once the warrant's issued, the case is automatically signed to an assistant DA. Other than the investigator getting the case file, That didn't happen. Our investigators only dealt with cases that were going to go to trial.
Okay.
So the assistant DA would get the case file, review it. If it was not prosecutable, he or she would get the warrant, write decline to prosecute, and send that on, and we would dismiss the case in the file.
And if the person happened to be in jail, then they were released?
We would get notice to the sheriff, and he or she would be released.
Okay. But going back to what Chairman Albers is saying, when we talk about a date, would a common date or something we may land on is the day after arraignment, where the person pleads not guilty, and then that's where they get a trial date? Where he's talking about to add that pressure to move the case through?
Well, no, the way it happened in my circuit was if he or she pled not guilty, the judge then would say, okay, we're going to put you, let's just say it's January. The judge says, we're going to put you on the March trial calendar.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. So
yes.
It would be at arraignment.
At arraignment, you go on a trial calendar.
Right. So the importance of, the key to expediting is getting the individual to arraignment as soon as possible while following all laws, case law, and
Yes.
everything.
And
Go ahead.
One thing also I want to point out is that 3 of the larger population counties or circuits, the Atlanta Circuit, the Stone Mountain Circuit, and the Cobb Circuit, have 2-month trial terms. That means those new jurors are being summoned every 2 months. When Pete talked about that, we're moving you on to the March trial calendar, that means that the court's in session and everything restarts 2 months later. We have in some of our other circuits 6-month trial terms. Like in Coweta County, for instance, you'll have jurors summoned, and that's the grand jury, that's the trial jury box for those 6 months. And judges may have 1 week, they may have multiple weeks, but when you're having these quick turnarounds, these quick terms of court, things have to move at a rather rapid pace. So when you're talking about getting trial dates, you're also thinking about summoning jurors almost on a weekly basis for trials. So there's an inherent cost with that as well.
And I want to be clear as we go walking through this, I'm not talking about people who are out on bond. I'm not talking about people who are managing their cases from home. I'm talking about men and women who are inside of county jails, unable to get out, and whether it be bond or either they can't afford the bond or there is no bond. How we expedite, is there a silver bullet to expedite those cases through the system to get them either to get them adjudicated? And so I think, and back to Chairman Albert's point, is at arraignment, the judge sets that trial date, and that puts into motion the plea deals and kind of separates the wheat from the chaff, so we know coming down the road what we really have that will be going to trial.
Well, that's the goal, but again, you have so many cases now that it's almost impossible to get to all those cases, even when they get on a trial calendar. I mean, you may have, for example, a trial calendar, let's just say one judge has a trial calendar with 150 cases, or let's just say he or she can break it up to 30 or 40 cases. You're not going to get to all those cases in 1 week or 2 weeks if that's what you have jury trials, and particularly if one case takes 1 or 2 weeks to try. I mean, so yes, it helps negotiate, but
is that 150? Is that a Fulton County judge?
I do not know.
No, what I'm trying to say is in the Coweta circuit, did you have judges that had 150 cases on the trial docket?
You had judges that would put about 50, 60, sometimes 100 cases on a docket.
And in more rural areas?
It could be just as many, because in more rural areas, they don't have state courts, so that the Superior Court would handle everything. And remember, when a case gets noticed, when we get that trial calendar, which say maybe it's 2 weeks in advance, we have to subpoena everybody. We have to get all of our witnesses, the crime lab witnesses, the law enforcement officers, the civilians. So that's the other side of it, is that I'm sending out subpoenas, or another assistant district attorney sending out subpoenas, saying, hey, Detective so-and-so, I need you and your case file available because you've got 4 cases on this trial calendar.
But Robert, aren't a lot of those state court cases going to be misdemeanors?
They would be.
Yeah. So, and I'm just, I'm not trying, I'm just trying to focus on the felony part of it, the ones that tend to languish longer. And so, because I know in the Chattahoochee circuit, I could see a judge with 150, 200 cases on a trial docket. But if we look around the state of Georgia, when you look at the bigger jurisdiction, you're talking about Cobb and Fulton.
I do not know how many cases they have, and I don't know what percentage of those that go on the trial calendar will plea. The real goal is moving as many cases as you can before trial week.
Right.
That's the real goal. So you can concentrate on those cases that go to trial, because once you get to trial week, and trial week is typically the most serious offenses. Okay, so that's really what you're concentrating on.
What number are you?
5.
We talk about priority of cases and trying to move those cases where someone's incarcerated, like your question. There's nothing under the law, or is there anything under the law that says you should treat a case where someone's incarcerated differently than a case where someone has been bonded out?
I think there is. Go
Uniform
ahead.
Superior Court rules.
It's in Superior Court
I believe
rules.
the Uniform Superior Court rules say speedies go first. It's either the statutory speedies, the one.
Yeah, speedy trial, obviously.
Speedy trial demands go first, and after that, then I believe it's incarcerated and then date.
So that's set out in Superior Court rule, but nothing under Georgia law in particular that requires that.
I'm not aware of a.
I'm not aware of a statute.
Is that a newer Superior Court rule? Has that been the rule as long as y'all know?
It's been the rule since I've been practicing, and
It's been the rule since I've been practicing that serious felonies went to the top, and people in custody always went to the top of the.
And from what you know, is that how people are practicing it as well in courts around
No,
the
sir,
state?
I can't. That I can't comment on. I don't know for a fact.
One other different topic. How is someone's ability to pay factored in when it comes to setting their bail?
I would think the judges would take that into consideration, but I don't know for certain. I know I have heard anecdotally that sometimes judges do not take that into consideration. But I would hope they would take that into consideration.
y'all did change the law.
In 2018 or so?
In
Yeah.
1761E, and one of the factors is the accused earnings and other income.
Yeah, I just want to make sure clear, that was something we did back in under Governor Deal in the last year. I was a full leader for Governor Deal when we did this. I remember it, is we codified that a judge must consider ability to pay. It was already, most would argue, a constitutional requirement, but we talk about somebody not being able to make their bail based on their financial circumstances. The judge is supposed to consider that. That way, what we said at the time is the kid, maybe Randy Robertson's child, who has plenty of money in the family, they might get out of jail quickly as they could pay, but my child might be stuck there as they can't afford it. But on a serious note, it's something we talked about, the idea, especially you hear all the time that people being treated differently based on where they come from, and we did address that in the law in that change in 2017. I think you corrected me, I thought it was 2017. I think I may have put on a couple mailers that year too.
Senator, is it not true you were the floor leader for Governor Deal?
I actually was.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sounds like a congressional campaign.
Yeah. Did you work in law enforcement in the past?
Occasionally.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
To something he said, and I know that used to you had to file an application for a public defender.
yes, sir.
It was a long, it was like you're trying to buy a car. You had to put your assets in, all this other stuff to determine, because we found that individuals who could afford attorneys were actually using public defenders, which were preventing those who could not afford an attorney the opportunity to get their cases through the system. And so we started doing something with the bonds similar to that, so the judges could understand if somebody like Strickland went in through there, they could afford the $25,000 bond, where if a Robertson came through, it would only be a $2,500 bond. And so, but the judges are not, they're not bound by any schedule put out by the legislator or anybody else on what they assess the bond as.
That's correct.
Whether it's $1 to $1 million, is that?
That's
is that-
correct.
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
correct.
so we'll make sure, because, and that's unusual. I didn't realize that the incarcerated individual stood above those not incarcerated as far as the trial calendar. And I guess that was done, and I'm not being facetious when I say this, out of a compassionate understanding of the judiciary, I would assume.
Well,
Is
and
that
it's
not-
also, I mean, part of it is cost to the county, and to get, if you have and also, usually the incarcerated are the more serious crimes, which the community has an interest in seeing that case brought to justice.
And just a crazy number how many cases actually go to trial?
Oh,
Well, I mean-
I will tell you, a majority of cases are negotiated. And the simple reason for that is you could not have, I know that years ago there was a talk about doing away with plea negotiations. And I used to tell my grand juries, yeah, y'all can do away with plea negotiations. That saved me 90% of my time. But get ready to get out your checkbook because those jails are going to be packed. And if you do away with plea negotiations, there is going to be one person who's going to hear the plea negotiations. It's either going to be the judge, who has to listen to both sides, talk about how strong their case is or how weak their case is, and he or she's going to make that decision. Somebody's going to decide. Because Georgia's kind of unique. You know, you talk about aggravated assault. Aggravated assault's not less than 5 nor 20 years in prison. Not every case is a 20-year prison sentence. Not every case is a 5-year prison sentence. So you have to have lawyers. And again, this is where it comes down to having seasoned, experienced defense lawyers and prosecutors who can look at a case, evaluate the case, talk to the victims, talk to the defendant, reach a negotiation, and move that case on. Because you have to move cases. If you don't, you get into the situation where we are now, where you have a backlog of individuals sitting in jails. And really the sheriff and Fulton County ought to be commended for moving so many cases that they have moved. Because the numbers here, and I don't know the numbers that the Fulton County DA's office takes on, but the sheriff talked about the numbers. How many arrests are made in Fulton County? I have no idea. The number of individuals arrested or the number of charges, I have no idea.
But I'm sure it far outpaces the 2,000 plus that are being held in the Fulton County Jail.
Absolutely.
Those held in the Fulton County Jail, would you say, are just a fraction?
Absolutely. There's no doubt. And you know, yes, we give priority to those cases in which someone's been in custody and there's been a child abuse. But you know, if you've been a victim of a domestic burglary, someone has broken into your house and he or she has made bond, you don't want to hear that it might take 2 or 3 years to get your case into court. You know, that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable for the community, for the victim, or even for the defendant who has this charge sitting over his or her head for 2 or 3 years.
What prevents that from happening, Pete?
Having the resources, like I said, it's labor intensive, being able to deal with those cases as they come in the door.
Resources within the prosecutor's office?
And defense counsel and the court system.
So when you say defense counsel, you're talking about public defender's office also?
Yes.
Okay. Because the vast majority of these individuals are not going to be going out hiring the...
They're public defenders.
Yep.
They hire public defenders. And we had an open door policy in my office that is a PD or even a defense counsel could walk in. We may not have indicted the case. The guy may have just been arrested. But if we can negotiate something right at the beginning, we'll negotiate right at the beginning.
I've got a couple of workforce questions. I don't want the topic we're on, but
No, it's...
Speaking of workforce, every time we add a new judge to a circuit, there's always a formula as to how many new prosecutors we're going to have to add, how many new public defenders. What is there a standard as to how many prosecutors and public defenders per judge in a circuit?
There is a formula. It's antiquated. It needs to be reconsidered. The formula is you get 1 assistant DA and 1 public defender per Superior Court judge. Plus you have an additional 2 assistant DAs. One's a chief and one's, I think, at the time was drug related or something like that for drug crimes. So if you have 5 Superior Court judges, you get 5 assistant DAs plus 2 more. That's 7. However, a majority of the assistant DAs are paid for by the counties, not by the state.
Right.
A better formula would be 2 assistant DAs and probably at least 1.5 or 2 public defenders per Superior Court judge. Now that would be up to the Public Defender Standards Council. I can't answer that. But 2 assistant DAs per courtroom is really a good working model because you can get a lot more done. But this whole, you get 1 per judge is not a good model.
Can you talk a little bit about the county paying versus state paying and how that works?
Yeah. So you get, the state pays for a certain number of DAs based upon your judges. For example, I had 7 judges. I got 9 state-paid ADAs. However, I had to go to the counties because 9 state-paid ADAs to work 5 counties with the caseload we had when I left was not workable. So I went to the counties who gave me another 12 assistant DAs. Not only that, the formula is not only do you get 1 ADA per judge plus 2, you also only get 1 investigator per circuit plus 2 admins per circuit. So Fulton County, and I don't even know what the population of Fulton County is. How much?
1 million.
1 million. Fulton County, 1 million people, is on the same formula as Coweta Circuit, 350,000 people. Fulton County got 1 state-paid investigator and 2 state-paid admins. I got 1 state-paid investigator and 2 state-paid admins from the state. Everything else that Fulton County has to come from Fulton County. Everything else that I got has to come from the 5 counties. So I had to negotiate with 5 counties to supplement my budget. And that also creates the issue where the metro areas are now paying significantly better wages than the non-metro areas. So you have a migration of experienced prosecutors that want to work in the urban areas, which is understandable. But there are some circuits now where they may have 6 assistant DAs allocated by the formula, and right now they only have 3 working.
Pete, I want to just want to reemphasize something you said to make sure that everybody absorbs this who's listening, either in person or online. There's 1 million people. This is our largest county. It's our capital county. I think it's actually more than 1 million now. People, and the formula is working identically for somebody that is 1/3 or less of that size. That is as glaring can be. Nobody can dispute that math. And certainly something as we're going through this process that we need to look deeper in to figure out how we bring things to be more consistent. Now, perhaps that was set at such a long time ago that those numbers weren't so off. Obviously, the metro area has grown at a pace much faster than most areas of the state. However, now is a good time for us to look at updating that. We'll be glad to work with you on that.
And I 100% agree. It is an antiquated formula, and it doesn't take into account the number of cases, the number of individuals who are coming into our criminal justice system. Nor does it take into account, and I think y'all have heard this, and you guys are at the epicenter of trying to deal with this, the number of mental health issues that we're dealing with at the local level.
Is that within the prosecutor's office?
Even within the prosecutor's office,
Right.
just when you have a defendant or a person charged with a crime that has mental health issues, and let's say he or she hasn't committed a violent crime, let's just say he or she is somebody that needs help. I remember particularly one person who was coming through the criminal justice system, and his family was telling me, there's no other place to go. You have to help him. And I was telling him, I don't have the resources in our circuit to help him the way he needs to be helped. And this was a young man who was having schizophrenic problems, who simply would not take his medication. When he took his medication, he was fine. When he didn't take his medication, so where was the place we had to keep him? In jail. And when you're dealing with these huge problems now, again, you need experienced, seasoned people that can handle these situations.
Pete, who set up the formula to begin with?
It was a formula when I had hair, like I said, back in 1984. I don't know who set it.
Who manages the I mean, it's not in code, right?
It is in code.
Is it the per capita? There's no per capita. It's just any
I'll
circuit.
I'll get Robert to research it, and we'll get back to you. I know there's a statute in place that talks about the number of personnel for a DA's office.
I think, and again, kudos to Chairman Albers for setting this up. These are the exact kind of problems that we wanted to find in this process, to where if our capital county is handicapped by an antiquated code that we could use to help make a stronger public defender's office, a more robust prosecutor's office to move these cases, then that's something we need to look at and see if that's something that we can do.
I mean, when I finally had the resources that I could have somebody in magistrate court, and the public defender could have somebody in magistrate court, the number of cases we could either negotiate or settle as they got in the front of the process was, I don't want to say astronomical, but so viable. I mean, it paid for itself to have somebody sit there, listen to the probable cause, listen to the evidence, and then either dismiss the case or negotiate the case right then and say, my client will take this, the victim's fine with this, let's go on.
I know that a lot of this. A lot of it was talking about Fulton County a lot, but you have the idea right now too of just having different ways of doing it around the state based on what local counties can do. You got to think in rural Georgia, especially how hard it is to have the resources. And so if we have a one-size-fits-all model we're funding, I know this way with a lot of things at the state level. We were talking last week about Superior Court judges and how it's different around the state.
Yes.
And trying to maybe make that uniform. But right now, I don't know what's going on in Fulton County. I'm not sure if they maybe are spending a lot of county money and actually have the resource they need or not. I don't know the answer to that. But either way, you're relying upon local governments to make those decisions versus having a statewide standard. And that's what concerns me. And I think it's important that we always talk about public defenders as well, as you said, because you need them as part of the system. Once you decided a case is moving forward, they're as much a part of the process as your office is and getting the cases moving.
Absolutely. There's no doubt a well-funded, a public defender system that has seasoned PDs in it is a tremendous help.
Because we have public defenders who have 50 clients sitting in jail who are trying to get each client their due process while protecting all of their rights. And these are men and women who, I think, looking at the pay they could easily go out and set up a private practice and make better money. Yeah.
Easy. And not only do they have the 50 clients that are sitting in custody, there may be another 100 that are not.
That's right.
And they want their day in court too, and so does their family. And again, same with prosecutors. I mean, yes, prosecutors, you have retained lawyers that you're dealing with, but and I'll just go back for the assistant DAs. They work hard. Mm-hmm. They work hard. I mean, and they put in weekends and they put in long hours. I can remember as an assistant DA, even back when I didn't have the caseload that we had today. I mean, I left for work before my kids woke up, and I got back after they went to sleep. And they don't make a ton of money. I mean, they don't even the highest paid assistant DA who's been with us 20 years makes a little bit over $100,000.
Well, Pete, if we go out on a limb here early in our second meeting and we say that the reason our jails are overcrowded is because we have a antiquated system of prosecution set up, then that's our goal, is to find a solution to break that clog there on the prosecutorial side so that these cases can start flowing out of our county jails and being adjudicated. Would you think that would be an admirable goal to alleviate the overcrowding in our jails?
Absolutely. I would think that'd be an admirable goal. But you know as well as I do, there's no one reason that this is happening. There are multiple reasons this is happening.
Well, I think,
I think there's ways to go about it, and that is one of the solutions that will help.
But I think if we look at the four individuals that that play the role in our jails, which is what we're here about, is the Fulton County Jail. County funding when it comes to the jail has to do with the staffing and the maintaining of the jail while the individuals are there. The sheriff's responsibility is to manage the jail while the individuals are there. The sheriff is not the one clogging up the judiciary and the prosecutorial side. the county, when focused on the jail, would not be the one. Now, we can talk about county funding in the DA's office, county funding in the
I see
court
what- I see
system.
what you're saying.
And see what I'm saying? But, so, you know, it seems right there is where we're bumping up against things. People are coming in the back door, but they're not going out the front door through the court system fast enough. And if that's because of a lack of resources, if it's because of an old antiquated system that does not work anymore. And look, I know the chairman and I have both gotten phone calls complaining about judges, complaining about prosecutors, complaining about everything since this started. But I think the problem is a little more complicated than that.
Absolutely.
And so,
But prosecutors are the gatekeepers. I mean, there's no doubt, we're the gatekeepers. We're the
But-
first ones that get access to the file, and we're the first ones that can look and see if a case is prosecutable or not.
but the public defender's office has a huge role in that also, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Something going there. We'll go ahead and speak it up.
15,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
151814 is about how the number of assistant DAs are appointed. 151814.1 is about where each DA's office is given one investigator. And then I believe it's 151819 is where sets it up for one administrative staff person.
Does it cite when that was put in the code there?
Does it happen to say when Pete had hair?
It doesn't go back that far.
Am I allowed to assert privilege?
Yes, absolutely.
It doesn't say when exactly. It does reference back to 1977.
When Pete had hair?
You know, back in my college days, University of
We're
Georgia.
talking about almost 47 years at minimum. See, I would say that's something worth revisiting.
I would agree,
But I
Mr.
do
Chairman.
think it's important to not just get caught on what the code says and what we think we ought to have today. We actually look at what we have today based on what the counties are paying for. Because if we're at a right model in a lot of counties, then we're just making it sound great, setting a new standard that we're already meeting. Does that make sense? I'd like to know more about what each circuit is doing.
There's some very generous counties, some counties that are very helpful to both the DA's office and the public defender's office in terms of providing additional staff. There are some that don't have as many resources and aren't able to help out as much.
But to Chairman Strickland's point, if we don't understand what everybody's doing around the state and there's no uniformity to it, then we're just fighting against a riptide. Because to Pete's point earlier of Fulton County hiring away, especially in the Coweta circuit where it's so close and people can drive back and forth to work, then we're not solving our problem. Because during the appropriations meeting last week, Herb Cranford gave us the numbers of the ADA shortages and the other issues that were impacting the prosecutors around the state. And again, wealthy counties have figured it out, but the individuals who are arrested in non-wealthy counties, they have the constitutional right to the same system of due process that anybody else has. So we need to make sure they have the same system that works also, which I keep emphasizing gets back to our goal of not having people sit in our county jails. Either they're at home adjudicated as not guilty, or they're in the prison system serving their sentence.
And I think also it talks about if you have two systems of justice where you can afford the resources and you have it, not only do you have people sit in jail, but you also have victims awaiting their day in court. And if you're a South Georgia victim and your family was armed robbery and home invasion and somebody was killed, and there's only 3 of the 6 prosecutors are available because they can't fill 3 positions, and you're going to have to wait. That's just as bad.
Well, I think one thing that you've shown us today, and I think is something that a lot of us knew walking into this meeting today, is the prosecution of an individual is not a simple process.
No, sir.
And that there is no straight line from somebody coming into the county jail to somebody standing in front of a jury of their peers. There are so many side roads and off-ramps during that process with everything from negotiations to, we're in Stewart County where grand jury meets once a year, or we're in Fulton County where the grand jury meets constantly throughout the year, and cases are, or should be being moved through the system.
And I was very fortunate, when you're a DA that's been elected 6 terms, you've developed relationships with law enforcement, with the chiefs and the sheriffs. And those relationships enabled me to tell them, this is what I need in the case file. The sooner you get me that case file, the sooner we can move that case. And I never had any problems with that. Never had any problems. And sometimes just sitting and waiting for a case file is enough to make anybody go crazy. It won't happen in 57 minutes like the chairman said, like it happens on TV.
And 26 days in jail is not.
No, sir.
It should be no one's expectation.
No, sir. I can't say that happens.
No. Anything you gentlemen would like to add to what you said today?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to appear before y'all. I always enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate the education because
even when Chairman Calvert's cross-examining me, yes, I enjoy it.
well, or when Senator Strickland has you 6 hours in judiciary answering his. 8 hours. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, Pete, I appreciate you, and Robert, I know you're underpaid. You have a client that you struggle with each and every day.
That is the truth.
There's no doubt.
I'm not under oath, but I will say it's a privilege.
But any other committee members with any questions or comments from PAC? Okay, if not, again, thank y'all so much.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate y'all, and this meeting will be adjourned.
I appreciate y'all. Thank you.